the lanterns of Riverwood are still burning. Somewhere in the village, an innkeeper is drawing the last mug of mead for the night, and the fire in the sleeping giant has burned down to a low and amber glow. Outside, the wind moves through the pine trees the way it always does in Skyrim, slowly without hurry, as though the cold itself has no particular destination. Tonight, we gather those quiet details together, the facts about the people who populate this frozen world, the men and women and elves and beasts who stand at their posts and carry their histories like cloaks pulled tight against the weather. Before you drift any further, consider subscribing for more journey like this, and let me know where you're watching from tonight. There is a woman who lives in Riverwood, and her name is Camilla Valerius. She runs the Riverwood Trader alongside her brother Lucan, and if the Dragonborn arrives in those first quiet hours after escaping Helgen, she is one of the first merchants they will encounter in a village that feels, despite everything, like a place where ordinary life is still possible. Camilla is young, and she is beautiful in the particular way that troubles people who cannot quite decide whether to admire from a distance or pursue with intention. Two men in Riverwood have made their decision. Fyendal, the wood elf who works as a lumber mill hand and spends his evenings crafting arrows by firelight, has loved her quietly and without much expectation for some time. Sven, the bard who performs at the Sleeping Giant Inn, has loved her loudly and with considerable confidence in his own appeal. The feud between them predates the Dragonborn's arrival by what appears to be a significant stretch of time, and when the player first walks into Riverwood, that tension is already fully formed. What makes Camilla interesting is not the competition for her attention, but the fact that she has opinions about it. She is not passive. She participates in conversations about her own future with the directness of someone who has thought carefully about her options and found both of them wanting in different ways. She is also the reason a quest begins. The golden claw that her brother lost to bandits is the inciting object of the Dragonborn's first real dungeon run, and it is Camilla who pushes for someone to actually go and retrieve it. There is an energy to her that the game renders quietly. She is a young woman in a small village at the edge of a very large and very dangerous world, and she has not yet decided what kind of life she intends to build inside of it. Camilla's relationship with both suitors has a layered quality that the game handles with more nuance than it first appears. Fyendal is devoted and sincere, a craftsman who expresses his affection through reliability and presence rather than charm. Sven is performative and slightly overconfident, a poet who believes that the right words, arranged in the right order, are equivalent to the actual substance that a life requires. Camilla seems to recognize both of these things. She is not oblivious to Fyendal's quiet steadiness, and she is not entirely deceived by Sven's theatrics. She exists in the complicated middle space that most real people occupy when they are deciding between someone who feels safe and someone who feels exciting, and she has not made her final choice by the time the Dragonborn arrives. If the player intervenes in the rivalry by carrying false letters between either man, the story tilts. The Dragonborn can essentially choose Camilla's romantic future for her by delivering forged correspondence that poisons her impression of one suitor or the other. It is one of the smaller moral decisions the game offers, not a matter of kingdoms or dragons, but of a young woman's understanding of a man she thought she knew. The fact that the game includes this choice at all says something about what Bethesda was trying to build in Riverwood. Not just a waypoint, but a place with the full texture of provincial life, where even the smallest social dramas have weight and consequence. Alvor is the blacksmith of Riverwood, and he is the kind of man who defines a settlement without quite knowing he does it. He is Rylof's uncle, which means the Dragonborn's arrival in the village carries a specific personal dimension, depending on which escape route they took from Helgen. If they came with Ralof, they are arriving not just as survivors, but as kin of a kind, and Alvor receives them with the particular warmth of a man who understands that the world has grown strange, and that strangers who come bearing news of his nephew are not to be turned away at the door. He feeds the Dragonborn, offers them the use of his smithing equipment, and directs them to Whiterun with the matter-of-fact generosity of someone for whom hospitality is not a gesture but a practice. Alvor's relationship to the Civil War is more complicated than his welcome suggests. He is an imperial sympathizer in a village where his neighbor and brother-in-law Hod leans toward the Stormcloaks, and this division runs through Riverwood like a hairline crack in stone. Visible if you know where to look, not yet dangerous, but present in every conversation that touches on politics. Alvor does not hate Ralof for his choices. He worries about him. There is a distinction, and the game captures it in the careful way Alvor speaks of his nephew, not with condemnation, but with the particular exhaustion of a man who loves someone who has chosen a path that seems to him needlessly hard. His craft defines him more than his politics do. The forge in front of his house is the first smithing station most players encounter in the game, and the items he sells are the basic materials of a beginning adventurer's life. He teaches what he knows without ceremony. He is not trying to be remembered. He is simply doing the daily work of keeping his village supplied with the tools it needs to survive another winter, and if that work also includes welcoming a confused and disoriented stranger who fell out of a dragon attack into his morning, then that is what the morning requires. Alvor's wife Sigrid has her own perspective on all of this, and it is a perspective delivered with the dry patience of someone who has long since learned to manage the consequences of her husband's openness. She is not unkind, but she is careful, and when the Dragonborn appears in her home, she is the one who notes, with quiet practicality, that feeding a stranger is one thing, and accommodating them indefinitely is another. Their daughter Dortha is perhaps the most charming detail of the whole household, a small girl with an intense and specific ambition to become a blacksmith like her father, who follows Alvor around the forge and talks about anvils with the focused passion that other children reserve for sweets or toys. Sven's mother Hilda is a citizen of Riverwood who has a very specific and very persistent belief that the Dragonborn should marry her son. She expresses this belief with the unguarded candor of someone who has never learned to filter the distance between a thought and its vocalization, and she will say it directly, without preamble, to the Dragonborn's face. The humor of this is not mean-spirited. Hilda loves Sven with the uncomplicated totality of a mother who has decided her child is exceptional and has not encountered sufficient evidence to revise that assessment. She is also, in a small and touching way, a figure of genuine loss. She is a widow, and the house she shares with her son has the quality of a space that was once larger and is now arranged around an absence. Sven himself, for all his bardic posturing, does have some small talent. His songs are not remarkable, but they are not terrible, and the fact that he performs at the Sleeping Giant every evening suggests that Orgnar and Delphine have found his presence at least commercially tolerable. What the game does with Sven is use him to sketch the contours of a certain kind of provincial ambition, the young man who is talented enough to believe that something more is possible and not yet experienced enough to understand how much more difficult the world beyond the village tends to be. The rivalry between Sven and Fyendal is the engine of a small quest, but the emotional truth underneath it is the story of two different relationships with Aspiration. Fyendal has found meaning in the work in front of him. He makes arrows. He tends the mill. He is present in the specific place where he has chosen to build his life, and his love for Camilla is an extension of that commitment to presence. Sven is reaching for something beyond Riverwood and using the idea of Camilla as the organizing symbol of that reaching. Neither approach is wrong. Both approaches leave something out. Orgnar is the barkeep at the Sleeping Giant Inn, and he is one of the more quietly interesting figures in Riverwood. He works for Delphine, who is ostensibly just an innkeeper, and he has no idea that his employer is one of the last surviving blades. He does not know that the inn he tends every evening is the cover identity of a former agent of the Empire's most elite intelligence and protective service. He has no reason to suspect it. Delphine is good at what she does, which is maintaining the appearance of exactly what she claims to be, and Orgnar is a man who takes things at face value with the philosophical equanimity of someone who has decided that the world contains enough complexity without adding to it through speculation. He is also, in his own way, a man of considerable depth, hidden beneath remarkable brevity. His dialogue options are short. He does not volunteer information. He serves drinks. He keeps the bar clean. He answers what he is asked with the minimum number of words that the question requires. But there is something in that economy that feels less like blankness and more like a considered relationship with silence. He is not unintelligent. He is simply someone who has made peace with the fact that most conversations do not require much from him, and he reserves himself accordingly. What Orgnar does not know about Delphine is one of the stranger asymmetries in all of Riverwood. He is working alongside someone whose real identity, if discovered, would draw the attention of every Thalmor agent is in Skyrim. He is serving customers in a space that contains a hidden room that is the nerve center of a two-person resistance movement. He mops the same floor that Delphine uses to receive agents and interpret ancient prophecy, and he has, in all probability, no idea about any of it. The gap between what he sees and what is actually there is enormous, and he lives inside it every day, perfectly content. Delphine herself is worth sitting with longer than most players do on their first visit to Riverwood. She presents as a mildly irritable innkeeper who is perhaps a little too guarded for the warmth of her profession, and that guardedness is precisely the point. She has been living this cover identity for years, watching for signs of the dragon's return while maintaining a persona that would pass the most casual scrutiny. She is not gruff because she is unpleasant. She is gruff because sustained vigilance over a very long period of time tends to wear the edges off a person's warmth, and she has been vigilant since long before the game begins. The Blades, the organization she belongs to, were once the sworn protectors of the dragonborn emperors, an elite order of dragon hunters and imperial agents who served the Septim dynasty with a loyalty that was also a vocation. The dissolution of that order following the Oblivion Crisis and the end of the Septim line left Delphine as one of a handful of survivors, carrying a tradition that had no one left to protect, and a set of skills that were suddenly without institutional purpose. She has repurposed those skills into watching, into waiting, into keeping a fire going in a provincial inn at the edge of the world until someone worth talking to finally walks through the door. Her manner with the Dragonborn, once she reveals herself, is different from her innkeeper persona in a way that is subtle but unmistakable. She becomes direct. She becomes purposeful. There is a kind of urgency in her that the inn routine has been compressing for years, and it comes out with all the force of something that has been held in too long. She wants to move. She wants to act. She has been keeping the faith of her order in silence for so long that the opportunity to finally do what she was trained to do carries an almost overwhelming momentum. Fyendal the Wood Elf has a life in Riverwood that is comprehensively organized around the specific geography of that village. He works at the lumber mill with Hod. He practices archery in his off hours. He tends what small domestic arrangements he has in a modest home, and he carries his feelings for Camilla with a quiet consistency that never quite crosses into action. He is not a passive man by nature. His archery is precise, and he has clearly spent considerable time developing a skill that has no immediate commercial application in a lumber town. He is someone who disciplines himself. He is someone who works toward things. And yet, in the matter of Camilla, he mostly waits. If the Dragonborn resolves the love triangle in Fyendal's favor, he becomes available as a follower, which adds a dimension to his character that is interesting in the context of his Riverwood life. He is willing to leave. He is willing to follow someone into danger. The quiet wood elf who stands at the mill and carves arrows by firelight is also a person who, given the right invitation, will pick up a bow and walk into the world beyond the village with something that looks very much like relief. The comfortable life he has built in Riverwood is not the whole of what he is. As a follower, Fyendal is steady and effective rather than dramatic. He does not narrate his own courage. He does not make speeches. He shoots, and then he shoots again, and then he keeps moving. This consistency of character, quiet, disciplined, reliable, extends from his romantic life into his practice in combat, and there is something satisfying about that coherence. He is the same person in every context. He does not perform differently for different audiences. In a world full of characters who are shaped by the roles they play, Fyendal is shaped by the person he actually is. Lucan Valerius runs the Riverwood Trader with the nervous energy of a man who has made a modest success in a place where modest success is the ceiling, and who has now had that modest success interrupted by a theft that feels personally targeted. The golden claw that was stolen from his shop is not merely a valuable item. It is the kind of object that a merchant in a small village can point to as evidence of a certain kind of history, a connection to something older and more significant than the daily trade in firewood and basic supplies. When it is taken, Lucan takes it as an affront that goes beyond the financial loss. His relationship with his sister Camilla is warm, but not uncomplicated. He worries about her. He has opinions about Sven and Fyendal that he expresses with the diplomatic restraint of someone who knows that expressing them too directly will produce an argument he cannot win. He manages the business with a competence that is not glamorous but is genuine, and he greets customers with the reliable cheerfulness that is a professional skill in retail trade rather than an expression of his natural temperament. What the game hints at, without quite stating it, is that the Valerius siblings came to Riverwood from somewhere else. They are Imperials by heritage, their names suggesting Cyrodiilic origin, and the specific item they carry, a Dwemer-adjacent artifact that opens a Nordic ruin, suggests a background that is more traveled than their current situation implies. How they came to be running a trading post in a tiny timber village in the mountains of Skyrim is a story the game does not tell directly, but the shape of it is there in the details, and it gives both characters a sense of history that extends beyond the current morning. The Jarl of Whiterun holds his court in Dragon's Reach, a palace named for the legend that one of its earlier occupants once used it to trap a living dragon, and the Jarl who sits on the throne when the Dragonborn arrives is Balgruuf the Greater. He is not the most dramatic figure in Skyrim's political landscape. He is not a rebel. He is not a tyrant. He is something rarer and in some ways more interesting, a man trying to govern well in a situation that does not particularly reward careful governance. Balgruuf's hold sits at the center of Skyrim's civil war, geographically and politically, and he is being pressured from both sides to declare an allegiance he has not yet decided to make. His reluctance to choose between the Empire and the Stormcloaks is not weakness. It is the product of a ruler who has thought through the consequences of that choice more carefully than his contemporaries, most of whom have already committed themselves with an emotional clarity he does not share. He can see the arguments on both sides. He can see that Ulfric's cause contains legitimate grievances alongside its uglier nationalist dimensions, and he can see that the Empire's authority has been compromised in ways that make its claim on Nordic loyalty harder to sustain. He is not dithering. He is thinking, and thinking takes longer than choosing. His court reflects his character. Proventus Avenici, his steward, is efficient and cautious, oriented toward the administrative rather than the martial. Irileth, his housecarl, is a Dwemer woman of considerable combat ability and personal loyalty, and the contrast between her dark elf heritage and her position as the chief protector of a Nordic hold is one that the game acknowledges with the quiet sophistication of a world that has more nuance than its surface suggests. Irileth has chosen Balgruuf and Whiterun as deliberately as Balgruuf has chosen her, and the trust between them is the operational foundation of the hold's security. Irileth is worth dwelling on separately from her role as Balgruuf's housecarl, because she is one of the more quietly complex figures in Whiterun's court. She is a dark elf from Morrowind, which means she has come to Skyrim from a homeland that has its own complicated relationship with Nordic culture. She has made Whiterun her home, not through birth or inheritance, but through decision, and that decision appears to have been made some years before the game begins, given the depth of her relationship with Balgruuf. She knows him. She understands his thinking. She is the person he sends to deal with the Western Watchtower when the dragon is spotted, because she is the person he trusts most to handle the thing that matters most. Her speech to the Whiterun guards before the Watchtower engagement is one of the game's better pieces of minor writing. She is not inspiring in the conventional sense. She does not promise glory or invoke the names of gods. She says, essentially, that they may die, and that this is a reasonable possibility, and that they are going anyway, because the alternative is to leave the people of Whiterun without protection. It is leadership that acknowledges mortality rather than obscuring it, and it has the particular authority of someone who has been in dangerous situations before and is not pretending that this one is different. Her opinion of the companions is respectfully distant. Her opinion of the court mage Farengar is tolerant, but edged with the professional skepticism of someone whose vocation requires dealing with immediate physical reality, and who has limited patience for those whose vocation allows them to remain in the theoretical. She is practical in a way that is almost a philosophy, and she brings that practicality to every interaction with the Dragonborn, whom she evaluates not on the basis of destiny or legend, but on the basis of what they actually do when the situation becomes difficult. Farengar Secret Fire is Whiterun's court mage, and his enthusiasm for dragon-related research predates the dragon crisis by what is clearly a significant period of time. He has been studying the possibility of a dragon's return with the focused energy of someone who has found the one subject that completely satisfies his intellectual appetite, and when the Dragonborn arrives and the dragons are actually coming back, he does not react with the alarm that most of Whiterun's residents display. He reacts with the excitement of a scholar who has finally had his hypothesis confirmed by reality. He has a somewhat abrasive manner with people who are not particularly interested in magic, which includes most of Whiterun. He is not cruel, but he is impatient with those who cannot follow his references or match his pace, and he does not particularly soften his observations to spare feelings he considers irrelevant. His relationship with Irileth contains a tension that never quite resolves, because they approach the world from such different angles that finding common ground requires more effort than either of them routinely invests. His research room in Dragon's Reach is one of the more lovingly detailed spaces in the game's opening portion, full of books and alchemical equipment and scrolls with the organized chaos of a mind that has too many interests to keep everything properly sorted. He has been at work for a long time in there, and the depth of his knowledge about dragon history and the ancient Nord tradition of dragon worship shows in the specificity with which he discusses both. He is one of those characters who rewards the player for actually asking him questions instead of just retrieving his quest items and leaving because the answers he gives are long and particular and full of details that illuminate the world. Proventus Avenici worries. This is, in a compressed form, the essential fact about Whiterun's steward. He worries about the Hold's finances. He worries about Balgruuf's decision-making. He worries about what the Civil War will mean for trade routes and tax revenue and the stability of institutions that depend on a certain political predictability to function properly. He is not a coward. Worry and cowardice are different things, and Proventus's worry is the product of a genuine and sophisticated understanding of how fragile the systems of civic life actually are when subjected to the kind of external pressures that Skyrim is currently experiencing. His daughter, Carlotta Valentia, runs a market stall in Whiterun's Plains district, selling produce with a steady competence that suggests she inherited her father's organizational abilities without his temperamental tendency toward anxiety. Carlotta has her own small drama. She is a widow, and the men of Whiterun's market district have interpreted her widowhood as an invitation that she has not issued. She manages the resulting unwanted attention with the patient firmness of someone who has been managing it for long enough to have developed a reliable technique, but it costs her something, and the game captures that cost in the specific weariness of her expression when the subject comes up. Proventus and Carlotta do not interact much on screen, but the family connection adds texture to both characters. He is a man who has built a respectable career in public administration and raised a daughter who has built a respectable life in public commerce, and the quiet dignity of that ordinary achievement sits in interesting contrast to the extraordinary events unfolding around Dragon's Reach's throne. Hulda, the innkeeper of the Bannered Mare, has been the social center of Whiterun's civilian life for longer than most of her customers have been alive in the Hold. The Bannered Mare is the kind of establishment that becomes indispensable through sheer persistence. It is where Whiterun's guards end their shifts, where traveling merchants spend the night, where citizens gather to process the news of the day over a shared pitcher of mead, and where the particular social chemistry of a Nordic city in a state of political uncertainty plays out in real time. Hulda manages all of this with the practiced efficiency of someone who has spent decades learning how to be the still point in a room full of moving parts. She is, by her own account, approaching the age at which she intends to retire, and she has a potential successor in mind, Isolde, a young woman with a specific and detailed ambition to own and operate her own inn, who can be found in the market area, talking to merchants and learning the trade with the serious focus of someone who has a plan and is executing it. The dynamic between Hulda and Isolde is one of the game's quieter mentorship sketches, the experienced professional and the determined apprentice, connected by a shared vocation and a mutual respect that the game suggests without quite narrating. The Bannered Mare's regulars include Mikael the Bard, who sings whether anyone is listening or not, and whose relationship with Carlotta in the market has taken on the quality of a nuisance she has to periodically address. It includes Uthgerd the Unbroken, a warrior woman who sits in the corner with the contained restlessness of someone waiting for an excuse to demonstrate what she is capable of. It includes Sinmir, who has opinions about the city guard's performance, and Nimriel, an elf with a private history she does not volunteer to strangers. The inn is a community in miniature, and Hulda holds it together the way good innkeepers always have, through attention, discretion, and the willingness to refill a cup without being asked. Vinar Greymane is an old man who sits by the fire in the Bannered Mare and says what he thinks. And what he thinks is that the Empire betrayed Skyrim when it signed the White Gold Concordat, and that the Stormcloaks, for all their rough edges, are the only honest answer to that betrayal. He says this without apology, and with the directness of someone who has earned the right to plain speech through the specific kind of experience that makes a man finished with being careful. He is old, so he has been a soldier. He fought in the Great War with the Imperial Legion before the Concordat changed what the Empire meant to him, and the shift that followed that change has had decades to set in his bones. What most players moving quickly through Whiterun will not notice is that Vignar is already the Stormcloak's chosen replacement for Bogruf as the Hold's Jarl. He has not advertised this. He sits in the inn and drinks and shares his opinions without the particular gravity of a man who expects to be governing a hold in the near future, but the expectation is there in the game's structure, waiting for the Civil War to deliver it. If the Stormcloaks take Whiterun, Vignar Greymane moves from his chair by the fire to the throne of Dragon's Reach, and the change is less dramatic than it sounds because Vignar's sense of authority was never really contingent on the chair. His family's feud with the Battleborns is the other dimension of his character, and it is a feud that runs as deep as the Civil War itself, because the two families have chosen opposite sides and invested that choice with all the additional energy of people who were already disposed to dislike each other. The Greymanes are Stormcloak sympathizers with a missing son, Thorald, who has been captured and is being held by the Thalmor, a fact that the Battleborns know and are concealing. The story of Thorald Greymane is one of the game's sadder sideline tragedies, a young man caught between two conflicts, neither of which he started. The Battleborn family occupies the position of Vignar Greymane's mirror in Whiterun's civic life. Imperial sympathizers, economically successful, socially prominent, and utterly certain of their own correctness in a way that makes them simultaneously easier to understand and harder to like. Edelaf Battleborn is the most vocal member of the family, a man who has committed to the Empire's cause with the kind of intensity that is less about loyalty than about the discomfort of uncertainty, and who manages that discomfort by speaking loudly and dismissing doubt as weakness. He knows where he stands, and the knowledge reassures him even when the ground beneath it is not entirely solid. His mother Bergrit Battleborn is more interesting. She is old enough to remember a Skyrim before the war, old enough to have a relationship with history that is not organized around the current conflict, and she sits by the hearth in her family's home with a quiet that seems less like contentment than like someone who has seen enough change to know that the current argument will eventually resolve itself one way or another, and that the resolution is rarely as clean as either side imagines. She has a friendship with Vignar Greymane that predates the political rupture between their families, and that friendship has survived the feud in the way that old friendships sometimes survive the things that younger ones cannot, through the accumulated weight of shared history being heavier than current disagreement. John Battleborn, the youngest, is a bard in training whose heart is not entirely in the imperial cause, not because he sympathizes with the Stormcloaks, but because his heart is with poetry, with music, with Ulfina Greymane across the street, with the question of whether the life he is expected to lead is actually the life he wants. He writes poetry. He practices lute. He sneaks letters to Ulfina with the hopeful secrecy of a young man who has decided that love is more urgent than politics, which it usually is. The Companions of Whiterun are one of Skyrim's oldest and most prestigious warrior guilds, and their mead hall Jorvaskr sits on the high ground of the Wind District with the permanence of something that has decided it is not going anywhere. The organization predates Whiterun itself, tracing its origins to the legendary 500 companions of Ysgramor who came to Skyrim from Atmora long before the holds were established or the cities were built. The current iteration of the companions is smaller than that legend and carries a secret that the founding generation did not have. Kodlak Whitemane is the harbinger of the companions when the Dragonborn arrives, which means he is the leader of the organization in the specific way that the companions understand leadership, not as a commander giving orders, but as the most respected voice in a gathering of equals. He is an old man whose body is beginning to fail him, and he has spent considerable time thinking about what comes after this life and whether his soul will be welcomed in Sovngarde or turned away by Hircine. This question is not abstract for him. It has the urgency of something that will be answered, and soon. The secret that the companions carry, that their inner circle, the circle, have been lycanthropes for generations, having made a bargain with Hircine long ago in exchange for strength, is one that Kodlak has come to regard as a corruption rather than a gift. He wants to be free of it. He has been working in what time remains to him toward a way to cleanse his soul of Hircine's claim, and the quest line that follows his death is essentially the fulfillment of a dying man's final wish, carried forward by the people who loved him. It is, for a warrior guild quest line, surprisingly gentle in its emotional center. Ayla the Huntress is probably the companion most immediately visible to the Dragonborn on arrival at Jorrvaskr, and she carries herself with the particular confidence of someone who has never had occasion to doubt that she belongs exactly where she is. She is a ranger by vocation and a warrior by practice, and she moves between both with a fluency that suggests they were never really separate in her mind. She hunts because hunting is the discipline that keeps her sharp. She fights because fighting is the thing the companions are for. The distinction is a matter of context rather than character. Her relationship to the lycanthropy at the heart of the companion's inner circle is different from Kodlak's. She does not regard it as a corruption. She regards it as a gift from Hircine, and she has made her peace with the possibility that Sovngarde is not her destination. She will run with the hunting grounds instead, in the form that Hircine granted her, and she finds that prospect not sorrowful, but fitting. She is a hunter. She will be a hunter in whatever afterlife receives her. The continuity of that identity matters more to her than the particular geography of where it plays out. Her manner with the Dragonborn is evaluative before it is warm. She wants to know what they can do. She is respectful of demonstrated competence and unimpressed by reputation that has not been earned in her presence. If the Dragonborn proves themselves through the companion's trials, her respect becomes genuine and her loyalty becomes reliable in a way that the game carries through the rest of her interactions. She does not give her trust easily, but she does not withhold it once it has been earned. Skjor is the other senior companion who will be familiar to players who pursue the guild's questline, and his energy is rougher than Ayla's, more impatient, more direct, more likely to say the thing that the room was not quite ready to hear. He has been a warrior for a very long time, and the accumulated experience of that life has not softened him into wisdom so much as compressed him into something harder and more efficient. He does not spend much time on ceremony. He does not offer more explanation than the situation requires. He is doing the thing, and if you want to do the thing too, then follow him, and if you do not, he will be somewhere else shortly. His relationship with Ayla has the quality of a long partnership between people who have fought alongside each other enough times that they have stopped needing to discuss the basics. They communicate in the shorthand of shared experience, and the Dragonborn entering their orbit enters it as someone who must earn their way into that shorthand rather than inheriting it. Skjor's willingness to include the Dragonborn in the circle's most significant ritual, the transformation, before the companion's leadership has officially sanctioned it, is a decision that drives the questline and costs him. He moves fast and trusts instinct, and this time the instinct outpaced the preparation. His death in the questline is handled with the understatement that characterizes the best of Skyrim's emotional moments. He is not given a long farewell or a speech that telegraphs his significance. He simply becomes an absence where there was a presence, and the people who knew him must reorganize around that absence and continue, because the companions have always continued, and continuing is itself the tribute they know how to offer. Vilkas and Farkas are brothers, and they are different in almost every way that brothers can be different while still sharing blood, training, and an organization. Vilkas is the thinker, not an academic thinker, but someone who processes the world through analysis and principle, who has opinions about strategy and code and the meaning of the companion's traditions that he is quite prepared to defend at length. He can be prickly. He can be intolerant of what he perceives as shortcuts or compromises with the standards that he holds seriously. He is, in the particular way of principled people who are also a little rigid, occasionally exhausting to deal with. Farkas is not exhausting. Farkas is one of the game's more quietly remarkable characters precisely because his manner initially reads as simple. He is large, he is physically formidable, he does not speak in complex sentences, and the game then uses that initial impression to do something kind. Farkas is not simple, he is honest. He sees clearly and speaks plainly, and the clarity and plainness of his speech are products of a genuine relationship with truth rather than a limited relationship with thought. He knows what he knows. He does not pretend to know what he does not, and he treats the Dragonborn with the uncomplicated warmth of someone who has decided they are worth treating well. The fraternal dynamic between Vilkas and Farkas informs everything about how they exist in Jorrvaskr. Vilkas is the one who challenges. Farkas is the one who supports. Vilkas is the one who will tell you what you did wrong. Farkas is the one who will be there when you need someone simply to be there. Neither brother is the whole of what a person needs from a community, but together they form something complete, and the companions would be poorer without either one of them. Jorland Greymane is the best blacksmith in Skyrim, and he works at the Sky Forge, an ancient forge located on a great rocky outcropping above Jorrvaskr that predates not just the mead hall, but the city itself. The forge was old when the first men arrived in Whiterun. It was old when the companions were founded. Whatever power lives in its stones and embers is not the product of any human institution, but of something earlier and less legible. And Jorland tends it with the reverence of a man who understands that he is the current custodian of something that will outlast him as thoroughly as it has outlasted everyone before him. His connection to the Greymane family places him in the center of Whiterun's civil war tension without being a political actor himself. He is a craftsman. His politics are expressed through his work rather than his words, and the work he produces is available to anyone who can afford it, regardless of their allegiance. The Skyforge steel he creates is a practical argument for his mastery that does not require him to make any of the verbal arguments that surround him. The blade speaks for itself. His relationship with Jorrvaskr and the companions is symbiotic and long established. He forges their weapons and maintains their arms, and they provide the context of meaning within which those weapons are used. He is not a companion himself. He is something adjacent, the craftsman whose work enables the warriors, who then return to him with damaged equipment and stories of where it has been. He knows the companion's history better than most of their current members do, simply by virtue of having been present for more of it. And his grief when the questline takes its central loss is the grief of someone who has known the institution long enough to feel each subtraction from it deeply. The city of Windhelm sits at the eastern edge of Skyrim, the oldest of the hold capitals, and it carries its age in the specific way of things that have accumulated too much history to wear it lightly. The Palace of the Kings is a vast and drafty structure that Ulfric Stormcloak inhabits with the authority of a man who has never quite decided whether he is a ruler or a rebel, because in Windhelm, those two things have always been more entangled than they are anywhere else. The city is cold. It is always cold. The stone that builds it is the same stone that forms the mountains surrounding it, and in winter, the wind off the Sea of Ghosts cuts through the streets with a directness that the architecture never quite manages to interrupt. Ulfric himself is the Civil War's most complicated figure, and his complexity is not the kind that resolves into a clear verdict if you simply gather more information. He is a man who genuinely loves his homeland and has genuine grievances about what was done to it and its people. He is also a man who uses those genuine grievances to justify actions and attitudes that complicate the moral clarity of his cause, most visibly in the treatment of Windhelm's non-Nord residents. The Grey Quarter, where the Dwemer refugees live in conditions considerably worse than those of the city's Nordic citizens, is the physical evidence of a failure of governance that Ulfric has either chosen not to address or decided is not his problem. The Dragonborn can speak to Ulfric and find him more thoughtful than his reputation suggests. He is not a simple nationalist. He has read history. He knows what the White Gold Concordat cost Skyrim, not just in symbolic terms but in material ones, and he articulates that knowledge with the precision of someone who has done the intellectual work to support his position. The tragedy of his character, if tragedy is the right word, is that the strength of his argument about what the Empire did to Skyrim does not automatically make him the right person to lead whatever comes next. Gelmar Stonefist is Ulfric's housecarl and the Stormcloak army's general, and he is a man who has resolved all of his doubts in favor of certainty. He does not engage with the complexity of the Civil War in the way that Ulfric sometimes does. He has decided that Skyrim belongs to Nords, that the Empire's authority is illegitimate, and that anyone who has not reached these conclusions is either an enemy or someone who has not yet had access to the correct information. This makes him effective as a military leader, because effective military leadership often requires the capacity to act on a conviction before all the evidence is in. It makes him less effective as a governor of the peace that will eventually follow the war, but that is a problem for a future that Galmar approaches with the same resolute certainty he applies to everything else. His relationship with Ulfric is the relationship of two men who have been through things together and emerged with a loyalty that is no longer contingent on agreement. He does not always agree with Ulfric. He thinks Ulfric is sometimes too careful, too political, too given to the long strategy when the immediate one would serve. But he believes in Ulfric with a conviction that predates any particular disagreement and will survive any particular disagreement, because the conviction is not about the policies, but about the person. His interactions with the Dragonborn who joins the Stormcloak cause are those of a man who wants to be convinced that you are serious before he invests anything in you. He will tell you what he thinks of you plainly, and if what he thinks is not flattering, he will not soften it. But once you have earned his respect, he gives it completely, and the warmth of his regard, when it finally comes, has the particular value of something that was not easily given. Brunwulf Freewinter is a Windhelm resident whose name is an editorial in miniature about his politics. He is a Nord who disagrees with the treatment of the Dwemer in the Grey Quarter and the Argonians at the docks, and who says so publicly in a city where that position carries real social risk. He is not a revolutionary. He is not trying to overturn Windhelm's power structure or organize the city's non-Nord residents into a political force. He is simply a man who finds the current situation unjust and says so with the particular quiet courage, of someone who understands the cost of the position and has decided to hold it anyway. His position in the city becomes significant if the Imperial side takes Windhelm in the Civil War. He is installed as the new Jarl, and the transformation from outspoken dissenter to the holder of actual power is one that the game handles with admirable brevity. He does not become someone different when the authority changes hands. He was already the person he intended to be. The Jarl's chair just gives him more tools to act on what he already believed. The Dwemer of the Grey Quarter have their own representative voice in a woman named Suveris Atheron, who manages the Shattershield shipping ledger and lives in the Dwemer Quarter with the compressed dignity of someone who has chosen to remain in a difficult place, because the alternative is to abandon a community that needs people who can function within the system. She is pragmatic. She has decided that accommodation is not the same as acceptance, and that doing the work within the structure is more effective for now than fighting the structure directly. The Shattershield family of Windhelm carries grief openly, and their grief gives them a specificity that distinguishes them from the Hold's more purely political characters. Tova Shattershield's daughter, Frigga, was murdered by the killer the game refers to as the Butcher, and the loss has reorganized the family around an absence that money and social standing cannot address. Tova herself manages her grief with the controlled devastation of someone who has responsibilities that require her to function and feelings that make functioning difficult. Her surviving daughter, Nilsine, is in a state of mourning that has not yet resolved into anything calmer, and the rawness of her loss is visible in every interaction. She is young. She is still discovering what it means to have a sister who was alive yesterday and is not alive today, and the discovery is happening in the context of a city that is already soaked in anxiety about the killings and the uncertainty of the war. She does not have the emotional resources to be anywhere other than exactly where she is, which is in the middle of a grief she has not yet learned to carry. Calixto Corium, the proprietor of a curiosity shop in Windhelm, presents himself as a harmless collector of interesting objects, artifacts from vanished civilizations, items of historical curiosity, the accumulated miscellany of someone who has traveled widely and retained everything. His house of curiosities is one of those establishments that a city like Windhelm accommodates because it is eccentric rather than threatening, and Calixto has cultivated the persona of the harmless eccentric with enough consistency to make it convincing. The truth about Calixto is considerably darker, and the revelation, when it comes through the Blood on the Ice questline, recontextualizes everything about his manner and his shop in a way that rewards players who have been paying close attention. Viola Giordano is the Windhelm resident most aggressively interested in solving the Butcher murders, and her interest has the quality of someone who has converted anxiety into activity because activity feels more manageable than anxiety. She distributes flyers. She encourages citizens to be vigilant. She visits the sites of the killings with a combination of horror and determination that is recognizable as the behavior of a person who cannot sit still with an unsolved problem. She is not always accurate in her conclusions. She has identified a suspect who is not the killer, but her energy is genuine, and her commitment to finding the truth is the most civic-minded thing happening in Windhelm's civilian sphere. Hijerim, the house in the Stone Quarter that figures in the Blood on the Ice investigation, carries a history that its walls do not announce. It was the home of Phorianthus, and then it became something else, and the evidence of what it became is hidden behind a wardrobe in a secret room that most of Windhelm does not know exists. The house is one of those Skyrim locations that function simultaneously as real estate and as narrative, where the space itself is the story, and the objects inside it are the sentences. Nuranya, an Altmer merchant in Windhelm's market, has a business life that is more complicated than her stall suggests. She is a fence for the Thieves Guild, operating within the structure of Windhelm's commerce, while simultaneously maintaining a relationship with its criminal infrastructure. She handles this double life with the professional ease of someone who has long since stopped experiencing it as tension. It is simply the arrangement of her life, and she manages both sides of it with the same business-like efficiency. Aventus Aretino is a child in Windhelm who has done something that most children in distress cannot do. He has successfully performed the Black Sacrament and called the Dark Brotherhood. He is alone in his family's house, surrounded by the bones and ash and nightshade of the ritual, and he is speaking to a figure who is not there, or was not there, until the Dragonborn walks through the door. His mother has died. He has been sent to an orphanage in Riften, which is run by a woman named Grelid the Kind, who is not kind, and whose institution is one of the more genuinely unpleasant places in the game's landscape. Aventus escaped and came home, and then he called for help in the only way that came to him. His story is one of the game's starker moments, not because of the violence it eventually involves, but because of the loneliness it begins with. A small boy in a large, empty house, performing a ritual he learned from some scrap of forbidden knowledge, talking to the night air, believing with the earnest conviction of childhood that the faith would be answered, and it was answered not by the Brotherhood, but by whoever walked through the door. The game allows the Dragonborn to fulfill Aventus's request and return to him with the news he was waiting for, and his gratitude, simple, genuine, delivered by a child who has been very afraid for a long time, is one of those details that stays. Grimvar Cruel Sea, another Windhelm child, knows something about what Aventus has been doing. He has noticed the strange rituals. He discusses it with his caretaker, Idissa Sadri, with the particular combination of fascination and unease that children bring to things they understand are serious but cannot fully place in context. His observation is a detail in the world's texture, a reminder that the things that happen in Skyrim have witnesses, and some of those witnesses are children trying to make sense of things that adults would find difficult. Riften sits in the southeastern corner of Skyrim, in a valley that the mountains have folded into something that keeps the light out longer than other cities. The city built on top of and beside Lake Honrik has a specific atmosphere, damp and layered and permeated by the smell of fish and trade and the particular human byproduct of a place where too many schemes have been attempted in too small a space. The Thieves Guild operates from beneath it, in the ratway that runs under the city's streets, and the relationship between the city above and the organization below is the organizing principle of Riften's social logic. Maven Blackbriar is the true power in Riften, and she does not conceal this so much as she has no particular reason to conceal it, since the people who would act on the knowledge are either in her employ or disinclined to make it their problem. She is the matriarch of the Blackbriar family, whose mead is drunk across Skyrim, and whose business relationships extend into every corner of the province's commerce, legitimate and otherwise. She is not cruel in the way of someone who enjoys cruelty. She is cruel in the way of someone for whom cruelty is simply an available tool, and who uses available tools without particular emotion about which ones she reaches for. Her relationship with her children is the specific coldness of a parent who regards offspring primarily as assets in a family enterprise, rather than as people whose development she is responsible for. Hemming Blackbriar, her oldest son, has absorbed his mother's worldview without her competence, which is one of the sadder inheritances in Skyrim's NPC landscape. He has the arrogance without the ability, and the result is a man who is unpleasant to encounter and easy to underestimate in the particular direction of overestimating his threat. Ingun Blackbriar, the daughter, has found in alchemy a discipline that is entirely her own and entirely removed from the family's political and commercial concerns, and in her absorption in it gives her a quality of genuine presence that neither her brother nor her mother quite has. Mjol the lioness arrived in Riften from elsewhere, attracted by the city's reputation as a place where things happen, and discovering on arrival that the things that happen in Riften are mostly not the kind that reward a person with a warrior's ethic and a discomfort with corruption. She has nonetheless stayed, driven by the particular stubborn decency of someone who believes that walking away from a problem is the one response to injustice that she is not willing to make. She hates the Thieves Guild. She hates Maven Blackbriar. She hates the corruption that has organized itself around Riften's civic structure with such thoroughness that it is almost indistinguishable from the structure itself. She's not naive about her odds. She understands that she is one person in a city that has been comprehensively penetrated by criminal organization, and that her hatred of the system does not give her the means to dismantle it. She is simply unwilling to be one of the people who looks away. There is something almost medieval about her morality, not medieval in the pejorative sense, but in the sense of a code of conduct that is old and consistent and not particularly interested in sophistication. She knows what is right. She does what is right. The difficulty is not a reason to revise the standard. Her companion in Riften is Aaron, a young man who helped her when she was injured and who has since become devoted to her in the way of someone who has witnessed real courage at close range and found it transformative. He follows her through Riften's streets with the attentive concern of someone who has decided that her safety is his personal responsibility, and she accepts this with the slightly bemused tolerance of a person who has always operated more or less alone and is not entirely sure what to do with being cared for. Brynjolf is the face that the Thieves Guild shows to the world in Riften's market, and it is a face carefully composed to project the exact kind of trustworthy charm that most efficiently separates marks from their better judgment. He runs a small scheme in the market, a stall selling a bogus health potion, less because the scheme is profitable than because the market is where the talent comes from, and he has learned to identify useful talent by watching how potential recruits handle a challenge under pressure. His recruitment of the Dragonborn is a test, and the fact that the Dragonborn passes it is the start of one of the game's longer storylines. What Brynjolf is underneath the charm is more interesting than the charm itself. He is a professional who has genuine loyalty to the guild and genuine belief in the thieves' code, not stealing from the poor, not killing unnecessarily, not drawing the kind of attention that brings heat down on the operation. He is not a cynical person. He has made choices that a cynical person would make, but he has made them from a system of values rather than from an absence of them. The distinction matters when the guild is in trouble, and he is the person who has to keep it together. His relationship with Mercer Frey, the guildmaster when the Dragonborn arrives, is one of professional respect that is curdled into something more complex without Brynjolf quite having identified the point at which it changed. He trusts Mercer more than Mercer deserves to be trusted, and the revelation of what Mercer has done to the guild is a betrayal that Brynjolf takes personally in a way that goes beyond the material damage. It is the betrayal of a loyalty he extended in good faith unto someone who used it instrumentally, and that kind of betrayal is its own specific category of wound. Tonelia, the fence in the Thieves Guild's headquarters beneath the Ragged Flagon, operates with the precise professionalism of someone who has decided that her vocation requires her to remain emotionally neutral about the items that pass through her hands and the people who bring them. She assesses value, she sets prices, she completes transactions. She does not ask where things came from or what they cost the people they were taken from. This is not callousness so much as the occupational requirement of a professional who would be unable to function if she carried the full weight of context for every transaction. The Ragged Flagon is the social space of the guild, and it has the peculiar atmosphere of a place that is simultaneously underground, in the literal sense of being built most beneath the city's sewage system, and the most congenial place its inhabitants can call home. The regulars include Delvin Mallory, whose services include special jobs and fence arrangements, and who carries himself with the easy confidence of someone who has been in this business long enough to have seen every type of person and few surprises. Vex, who specializes in lockpicking contracts, is the Flagon's most impatient resident, a woman whose relationship with inefficiency is one of active hostility, and who expresses that hostility with a directness that occasionally passes through sharp and continues on to something harder. The guild's structure under Mercer Frey has been subtly hollowed out in ways that its members sense without being able to identify. Business is down. Jobs are going wrong. The luck that thieves rely on, not superstition exactly, but the accumulated result of the guild's relationship with Nocturnal, the Daedric Prince of Night and Shadow, has been withdrawn. The members feel this as a general worsening of their fortunes without understanding its source, and the resulting anxiety gives the Flagon a quality of low-level unease beneath its professional surface. Mercer Frey is the guildmaster, who presents as the organization's steady institutional hand, and is in fact the reason it is failing. He has betrayed the guild's most sacred covenant, the oath to Nocturnal, maintained through the skeleton key, the artifact that guarantees the guild's good fortune, by stealing the key and using its power for personal advantage. He has been killing the guild's contacts and arranging the blame to fall on others. He has done all of this from inside the organization's leadership structure, with the patience of someone who has no loyalty to the institution he runs, only to his own benefit. His presentation is impeccable. He is precise, competent, composed, and slightly contemptuous of everyone around him, in a way that reads as professional rigor rather than personal malice. He has been reading people in this organization for long enough to know exactly how much to show and how much to conceal, and the gap between the two is the space in which he has been operating for years. When the Dragonborn begins to unpeel the truth about him, the unpeeling begins at the edges and works inward, and the picture that emerges is of someone who decided very early that the world was a system to be extracted from rather than a community to belong to. Carlia, the Dunmer thief, who Mercer has framed for the guild's misfortunes, carries the weight of a decade-long false accusation with the contained patience of someone who has had to build an entire interior life around waiting for the opportunity to tell the truth. She is Nocturnal's most devoted agent, a nightingale in the deepest sense of that tradition, and her relationship with the Daedric Prince of Shadow is not servitude, but something closer to a vocation she has chosen and renewed. She has skills and knowledge that the current guild does not, and when she is finally able to share them, the sharing has the quality of something long withheld finally being offered. Honor Hall Orphanage in Riften is run by Grelid the Kind, and she is not kind. She is a woman who has decided that children in her care require not nurturing but discipline, and who has organized the institution around her interpretation of that requirement with a thoroughness that leaves no room for warmth. The children who live in Honor Hall are fed and housed, which satisfies the minimum institutional definition of her role, and they are otherwise subjected to a management philosophy that the game renders through environmental detail and the children's expressions rather than through direct narration. Constance Michel, who works alongside Grelid at the orphanage, is the counterweight, a woman who genuinely cares about the children's well-being, and who is navigating the impossible situation of trying to provide that care within an institution organized around its opposite. She is patient with the children in the way of someone for whom patience is not performance, but actual disposition. She is careful with Grelod in the way of someone who understands that direct confrontation will change nothing for the better, and who has chosen the preservation of her access over the satisfaction of her honesty. After Grelod's fate is settled through the events of the Dark Brotherhood questline, Constance inherits the orphanage, and the transformation of the institution that follows is one of the game's smaller but more satisfying resolutions. The same building, the same children, a different person in charge. It is a reminder that institutions are not their structures, but their people, and that the difference between a good home and a bad one can be exactly one person making different choices. The Bards College of Solitude occupies a specific and unusual position in Skyrim's landscape of institutions because it is simultaneously a school and an archive and a cultural preservation project, and a relatively comfortable place for people who have found that the combination of music and history and storytelling is the closest thing they have to a vocation. Director Viarmo manages the institution with the particular combination of artistic temperament and administrative necessity that anyone who runs a school understands from the inside, and he does it in solitude, which means he is also navigating the court politics of Skyrim's most imperial city. The festival of the burning of King Olaf is the college's most visible cultural event, a celebration of a historical high king and the bard who imprisoned him in verse, and the quest to find the missing verses of Olaf's verse is one of those Skyrim quests that rewards players who are interested in the province's history for its own sake. The verse is a real artifact, a piece of literature that the game takes seriously as literature, with the complexity of historical interpretation that real texts accumulate over time. Viarmo's willingness to interpolate missing stanzas is itself a small meditation on what tradition does with gaps in the record. Pantea Atea teaches voice at the college and is one of those teachers whose dedication to her subject has not been diminished by time, but rather intensified by it. She knows precisely what she is capable of and what she is asking her students to attempt, and she expects them to take the gap between those two things as seriously as she does. Inga Six Fingers teaches lute with the confidence of a woman who has decided that her 3 decades of dedicated practice have earned her the right to be direct about what she hears. Jiro Jaman handles the history program and maintains the college's library with the careful attention of someone who understands that the texts in his keeping are the province's memory, and that memory, once lost, cannot be reconstructed by anyone. Elisif the Fair is the Jarl of Solitude and the widow of the High King Torig, and her position at the beginning of the game is one of the most genuinely difficult in Skyrim's political landscape. She is young. She did not inherit her Jarl's seat through years of administrative preparation, but through sudden and violent loss, and the court she now leads contains people with far more experience than she has, and in some cases, far more ambition than her situation allows. The Blue Palace is a beautiful building that is also a trap for someone who does not yet know all the ways it has been arranged against them. Her grief for Torig is genuine, and it gives her a quality of emotional openness that is unusual in Skyrim's political characters. She does not perform her grief. She feels it in the specific way that people feel things when they have not yet built up the protective architecture that extended experience provides. When she asks the Dragonborn to scatter Torig's drinking horn in a place he loved, she is doing something that real people do, finding a way to mark a loss with a gesture that the feeling requires, even when the gesture itself cannot address the feeling. Her relationship with Falk Firebeard, her steward, is the operational foundation of her Jarl's role. Falk handles the administration of the hold with a competence that she is still developing, and he does it without condescension. He supports her authority while providing the institutional knowledge that she has not yet accumulated. He is loyal to the Jarl's seat and to her personally, and the combination gives Elisif enough stability to function in circumstances that would overwhelm someone without that support. Erikr is a Solitude Thane with the practiced self-confidence of someone who has converted wealth into influence and influence into the assumption of unlimited entitlement. He is one of those characters who serves a specific function in the world's social texture, the reminder that proximity to legitimate power does not produce legitimacy in the people who seek it. He attends court, he offers opinions, he treats the Blue Palace as a venue for the transaction of his own interests rather than the public good, and he does all of this with the comfortable ease of someone who has never had occasion to question whether his access to these spaces was appropriately earned. His interactions with the Dragonborn are dismissive in the specific way of someone who operates through social hierarchy and has not yet processed the information that the Dragonborn is not subject to it. When the Dragonborn's actual status becomes impossible to ignore, the adjustment he makes is not a revision of his worldview, but a recalculation of where the Dragonborn fits within it. He is not capable of seeing the Dragonborn as someone outside the system of social rank. He can only see them as someone whose rank he may have initially miscalculated. Sorex Vinius, who works at the Winking Skeever Tavern that his father Corpulus operates, has a more honest relationship with his position in Solitude. He is employed in his family's business, which he did not choose, doing work that is not glamorous, in a city that offers considerably more opportunity than most of Skyrim's other settlements, and which he has nonetheless not quite managed to leverage into anything beyond the current arrangement. He is not unhappy. He is simply someone who has not yet decided what he is working toward. The city of Markarth is built inside a Dwemer ruin, which means that every stone wall and metal archway and carved surface in the city is 1,000 years older than the civilization that currently occupies it. The Nords who live in Markarth are living inside a monument to a people who are gone, and the stone corridors they walk every day were designed by engineers whose understanding of architecture and metallurgy exceeded their own. The effect is one of permanent displacement, of people who have made themselves at home in a house that was not built for them and who have been there long enough to stop noticing how strange that is. The forsworn question is the organizing tragedy of the Reach. The Reachmen, sometimes called Bretons, are the indigenous population of the Western Reach, and they had their own civilization before the Nords took the territory. They held it briefly during the Great War, when the Imperial Legion withdrew. They lost it again when Ulfric Stormcloak, in an early and significant demonstration of what he was capable of, retook Markarth through violence that included the specific instruction to his troops to leave no forsworn alive. The details of the Markarth incident, as it came to be called, were suppressed by the Empire in exchange for allowing Talos worship, temporarily, in Skyrim, and the suppression has not made the underlying wound any smaller. Nepos the Nose is a Markarth resident who appears on the surface to be an elderly reachman living out his last years in relative comfort and irrelevance. He is also a forsworn agent who has spent his long career in Markarth gathering information and facilitating violence from inside the system he is ostensibly accommodated by. He is a reminder that the Forsworn are not simply an external threat, but a presence that permeates the city in ways that its inhabitants have not fully mapped. Ondolamar is the Thalmor overseer stationed in Markarth, and his role is to monitor the compliance of the Reach with the white gold concordance ban on Talos worship. He performs this role with the focused contempt of someone who regards the entire civilization he is monitoring as fundamentally inferior to his own, and who is not bothered to conceal this assessment from the people he is assessing. He is efficient and unpleasant in exactly the way that an agent of oppressive authority is expected to be, and the game does not soften this or offer him redemptive complexity, which is itself a choice about what kind of character he is meant to be. Calcelmo is the other great intellectual presence in Markarth, and he is as different from Ondelamar as it is possible to be while occupying the same institution. He is an Altmer scholar whose life's work is the study of the Dwemer, and his relationship to Markarth is the relationship of a man who has spent so long studying the civilization that built the city that he has come to regard the ruin around him as primarily a research opportunity. His museum in the city is the accumulated evidence of a lifetime of scholarship, and his access to Njuand Zel, the Dwemer ruin beneath Markarth, is the prize he has been granted for the prestige his work has accumulated. His nephew Icantar assists him with the research with the cheerful patience of a young man who is fond of his uncle and has accepted that the work is going to consume most of their shared time. Calcelmo's social skills are not his strongest attribute. He is so absorbed in his scholarship that the ordinary social transactions of a city life require more of his attention than he would prefer to give them. He is also deeply, embarrassingly in love with Feline, the housecarl of Markarth's Jarl, and has been unable to express this with anything approaching the eloquence that his academic writing would suggest he possesses. The Silverblood family is Markarth's dominant merchant and political power, and their grip on the city is comprehensive enough to make Maven Blackbriar's arrangement in Riften look modest by comparison. Thonar Silverblood handles the family's more practical enforcement needs with the directness of someone who has decided that the distance between wealth and actual authority is an inconvenience he is not willing to accept. His brother Thongvor Silverblood manages the public-facing political dimension of the family's power, presenting as a civic-minded Nord patriot, while the more troubling operations of the family business are conducted through other channels. The Sidna mine that the Silverbloods control is Markarth's prison, and it is a mine as well, which means the city has arranged for its criminal class to also be its unpaid mining labor. The forsworn leader Madanak, the king in rags, sits in this prison managing his movement from inside its walls with an authority that has not been broken by the specific humiliation of his incarceration. He is a figure of considerable complexity, a leader whose cause is legitimate and whose methods are not, and whose imprisonment has given him the particular moral clarity of someone with nothing left to lose. Endon is the court silversmith of Markarth, working with the refined metals that the Dwemer ruins of the Reach have been providing to skilled craftspeople for generations. His work is precise and historically informed, drawing on Dwemer techniques that he has studied in Calcelmo's translations without quite being able to replicate the Dwemer's own achievements. He is part of the Reach's ongoing relationship with its extraordinary inheritance, the tools and techniques and materials left behind by a civilization that understood certain things about the world that current understanding has not recovered. The College of Winterhold is Skyrim's only institution dedicated to the formal study of magic, and it sits at the northeastern edge of the province, perched on a cliff above the Sea of Ghosts, connected to the town of Winterhold by a bridge that is all that survived the Great Collapse. The collapse happened a century before the game begins, and it destroyed most of Winterhold in a matter of hours, reducing a city that had once been the most significant in Skyrim to a village of perhaps a dozen buildings and a citizenry that has been blaming the college ever since. The college's relationship with the town of Winterhold is one of the game's more quietly melancholy social arrangements. The college had nothing to do with the Great Collapse, Scholars have since determined that the most likely cause was the catastrophic magical and tectonic events of the Oblivion Crisis. But the townspeople's decision to attribute their loss to the most visibly magical institution in the area is a comprehensible, if inaccurate, human response to catastrophe. And the college, whose members have generally concluded that engagement with a hostile and scientifically illiterate population is not worth the investment, has allowed the distance to harden into the current mutual indifference. Jarl Courier of Winterhold holds the town's grudge against the college with the consistency of someone who has inherited it rather than chosen it. He cannot effectively move against the college, which is technically sovereign territory within the hold, but he can and does maintain the posture of official displeasure. His wife Thornjolf is more practically oriented and less committed to the principled position. She has a child to raise and limited resources, and her energies are directed toward the immediate rather than the historical. Archmage Savos Aren administers the College of Winterhold with the careful authority of someone who understands that the institution he leads is always one serious mistake away from giving the province's skeptics exactly the evidence they have been waiting for. He is a Dwemer mage of considerable ability and longer experience, and his manner is the manner of someone who has been managing difficult situations for long enough to regard the management itself as the primary vocation. He is not cold, he is contained, and the containment is the product of a practiced relationship with the particular responsibility of institutional leadership. What is not immediately visible about Savos Aren is his relationship to the Hall of Countenance's deepest rooms, and to a secret that the questline will eventually reveal involves a group of college students who were sent to Labyrinthian decades ago and never came back. He was one of that group. He is one of the survivors, and his survival came at a cost that he has been paying in silence ever since. The specific cost is one of the questline's more disturbing revelations, and it reframes his composed exterior as something that was built over a very long time, over something that would otherwise be impossible to live with. Mirabel Irvine, the college's master wizard, handles the day-to-day administrative operations that Savos's position requires him to be above. She is competent and slightly impatient with those who are not, and she has the particular sharpness of a person who has spent years doing essential work that receives less recognition than the more ceremonially visible role above her. She is also genuinely devoted to the college's mission and to the people within it, and her loss when the questline takes it is felt as a structural blow to the institution as well as a personal one. Arniel Gain is a researcher at the College of Winterhold who is working on a private project he is reluctant to discuss in detail, and his reluctance has the quality of someone who suspects that the detail, if shared, would attract scrutiny he is not prepared to manage. He is studying the Dwemer with a specific question in mind about what happened to them, the mass disappearance of an entire civilization at a single moment, the mystery that defines Dwemer study, and that no one has answered satisfactorily despite centuries of effort. His private project is an attempt to replicate the conditions of that disappearance, which is the kind of idea that is either brilliance or catastrophe, depending on what the replication produces. His questline is one of Skyrim's more melancholy, in the way that the Dwemer mystery is always melancholy, the sense of a door that cannot be opened, a question that cannot be answered through any method currently available, and a man who has pushed so far into the unknowable that the boundary has taken him rather than turned him back. The outcome of his experiment is ambiguous in the specific way that the Dwemer disappearance itself is ambiguous, which gives his story a resonance that the game achieves through structural coherence rather than explicit statement. Berlina Marion is a student at the college from House Telvanni of Morrowind, and she carries with her the particular pressure of someone who represents a distinguished family tradition and is not entirely certain she is measuring up to it. She is sincere and hardworking and prone to the magical accidents that happen when someone who is genuinely skilled is also genuinely anxious, and her arc through the college questline is one of growing competence and confidence without quite losing the self-awareness that her concern about her own performance has given her. She is one of the college's more fully realized student characters, not because she is exceptional, but because she is recognizably human in the specific way of someone trying very hard at something that matters to her. Jazargo is the college's Khajiit student, and his manner is the manner of someone who has decided that confidence expressed consistently enough becomes indistinguishable from the real thing, which in his case it may actually be. He is not falsely modest. He has genuine ability, and he knows it, and his expression of that knowledge is more direct than his fellow students find comfortable. He is also, beneath the competitive bravado, a person of genuine warmth and genuine interest in the Dragonborn's development, not because he is being altruistic, but because someone who matches his ability is more interesting to be around than someone who does not. His scroll experiment, which he asks the Dragonborn to test on undead enemies, does not perform as he advertised it would perform. His response to this failure is revealing. He is frustrated, but he is also honest about the failure, and his honesty has a quality of self-awareness that his surface manner does not always project. He can be wrong. He knows it. He will not pretend otherwise, though he might prefer the information not to be shared widely. Onmund is the Nord student whose discomfort with magic in a Nordic culture that distrusts it has given him a particular relationship to the college. It is the place where he can pursue his vocation without managing the disapproval that he would face at home, and this freedom has the quality of something he is still getting used to. He is earnest and slightly formal, as though the gravity of having chosen to be somewhere requires him to maintain a certain composure about the choice. His family heirloom, sold to Enthir to fund his tuition, is the small domestic tragedy of his backstory, and the Dragonborn's ability to recover it for him is one of those gestures the game rewards, not with epic consequence, but with the simple gratitude of someone for whom the item meant more than its monetary value. The Dark Brotherhood operates from the sanctuary in Falkreath Hold, underground, through a door that requires a password spoken to darkness. The Brotherhood is an assassination guild with a long history in Tamriel, organized around the worship of Sithis, the void that is the source and end of all things, and the Night Mother, the corpse of a woman who serves as the living, or unliving, bridge between the Brotherhood and Sithis. By the time the Dragonborn arrives, the Brotherhood has contracted considerably from the power it once held, and the remaining members know it. Astrid leads the sanctuary with the particular authority of someone who took power through force of personality rather than through the traditional hierarchy, which means she is leading an organization whose actual structure she has bypassed rather than inherited. She is competent and charismatic, and she loves the Brotherhood in the way of someone who has made it her entire world. She is also wrong about some of the most important things, and the wrongness still has consequences that she cannot undo. Nazir manages contracts from inside the sanctuary with the dry efficiency of someone who has decided that the most useful response to the organization's declining fortunes is to keep doing the work and to keep the atmosphere functional. He has a sense of humor that is dark in the specific way that people who deal in death develop it, as a relationship management tool rather than an emotional one. He is reliable, and reliability in an organization full of people who have chosen a vocation that includes unpredictability is its own kind of gift. Babette is a vampire who has been a child in appearance for centuries, and the combination is one of the game's stranger character choices. A small girl who discusses her methods of assassination with the clinical cheerfulness of someone who has had a very long time to make peace with what she is and what she does. She maintains her access to places an obvious assassin could not reach precisely because no one, seeing a small girl walking into an inn, would attach the correct interpretation to her purpose. She is in this way the perfect example of the Brotherhood's philosophy about the relationship between appearance and reality. Vizara is the sanctuary's Argonian member, and he carries himself with the self-possession of someone who has been a professional for long enough to have integrated the work into a coherent identity. He is not particularly given to philosophical discussion of what the Brotherhood is or what it means. He does the work. He maintains his skills. He is present when presence is required, and efficient when efficiency is what the situation needs. Cicero, the Brotherhood's jester, is a figure of considerable complexity beneath the motley and the laughter. He is the keeper of the Night Mother's coffin and the keeper of her words, and his devotion to this role is absolute in the way of someone whose identity has been entirely organized around it. The Night Mother chose him as her listener, and the weight of that calling has done something to him that the game renders as madness, but which is more accurately described as total commitment to a purpose that most people could not sustain. He is not dangerous to the Brotherhood. He is devoted to it in a way that has survived every test the organization has put him through, including the rejection that sent him wandering with a coffin across all of Tamriel. The Dawnstar Sanctuary that has been dormant receives the Brotherhood's eventual relocation. But before the Brotherhood's story concludes, the Night Mother's true listener receives their commission, and the game reveals what Astrid either did not know or chose not to tell. The Emperor has a brother. The Emperor has a target. The quest line unspools toward its extraordinary conclusion through a series of contracts that take the Dragonborn across Skyrim's social geography: a jester, an officer, a cook, and finally the man himself in a location that the game delivers as a genuine surprise. Commander Maro, the Penitus Oculatus officer investigating the threat to the Emperor, is one of those antagonists whose position is entirely comprehensible. He is protecting the Emperor. He is doing his job. The fact that his job puts him in direct opposition to the Dragonborn's current employment does not make him wrong. His personal loss during the quest line, a loss that the Dragonborn can either cause or not cause depending on their choices, gives his antagonism a particular quality of grief that makes his vendetta intelligible even when it is lethal. The Emperor himself, when he finally appears, is one of the game's stranger moments of quiet. He is a small old man on a boat who knows he is about to die and has arranged the occasion with what amounts to a professional interest in how the Dragonborn will manage it. His remarks about destiny and circumstance have the quality of someone who has thought about death long enough to be more curious about it than afraid, and his final gesture, which sets in motion the conclusion of the questline, suggests a man who is still, even at the moment of his death, playing a longer game than anyone around him has realized. The village of Riverwood, which we began with, and its small community of familiar faces, is the most accessible scale of Skyrim's world, small enough that every face can be named, large enough to contain the essential social dynamics that the holds expand into their grander versions. But Skyrim has smaller settlements still, places where 1 or 2 or 3 people maintain a life in conditions that the hold cities would find extraordinary, because the Nords who populate the province have always had a complicated relationship with the wilderness that surrounds them. Alain Dufont and his bandit group occupy Raldbtar, one of the Dwemer ruins scattered through the eastern portion of the province, and Alain himself is the target of one of the Dark Brotherhood's earliest contracts. He is, by the time the Dragonborn reaches him, a man who has made choices that have led him somewhere irreversible, living inside a ruin of an older and better civilization, and having made of it something that the ruin's original builders would have found difficult to interpret. He has a connection to one of Markarth's citizens that the quest does not announce, but the game's broader lore supports. Embry is a Riverwood resident who drinks. This is his primary narrative function, and the game presents it without judgment, in the quiet way of a world that contains the full range of human responses to difficulty. He is not a figure of comedy or cautionary tale. He is someone who has arranged his days around a specific comfort, and the village has made room for him in the way that small communities usually make room for the person who has found their limits and settled there. Idra, who runs the Braidwood Inn in Kynesgrove, is one of those innkeepers who has ended up in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong moment in history. Kynesgrove is the site of a dragon burial mound, and when the resurrections of Alduin's fallen forces begins in earnest, Kynesgrove is one of the first locations it touches. Idra is caught in this with the bewilderment of someone who runs an inn in a small mining village and was not expecting the main event of the current age to happen in her backyard. Her husband, Rogi Knotbeard, has his own minor storyline involving a debt and a family legacy that the game handles with the understatement of someone who understands that not every man's crisis needs to be epic in scale. Rogi is a person of goodwill living with a particular shame, and the Dragonborn's ability to resolve that shame by recovering an item that was lost gives him a kind of closure that the game renders through relief rather than celebration. He is grateful. He was not expecting someone to help him with something he had stopped believing could be helped. The dragon at Kynesgrove is the first resurrection the Dragonborn witnesses that they did not cause, and it comes with the figure of Alduin himself, performing the rite that restores his fallen warriors. Watching Alduin raise a dragon from the earth, seeing the bones reassemble, hearing the word of power that pulls life back into what was long dead, is one of Skyrim's most effective dramatic moments. And it happens in the backyard of a small inn where a woman named Idra is trying to run a business. Septimus Cygnus lives on an ice floe northwest of Skyrim, in an outpost of old knowledge that he has reached by traveling so far toward the edge of things that very few people would bother to follow. He has been searching for the Dwemer lexicon that contains information about the Elder Scrolls, and the specific nature of his quest has the quality of someone who has gone so far into an obsession that ordinary reality has become background noise. He is brilliant, and he is, by any standard that does not include the specific standard of his own inquiry, profoundly alone. His relationship with Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric prince of knowledge and the forbidden, is the relationship of a man who sought out the one entity that would tell him what he wanted to know without being careful enough about the price of that information. Hermaeus Mora does not give knowledge as a gift. He gives it as a transaction, and the terms of the transaction are more comprehensive than Septimus. In his excitement at the prospect of learning something no one has learned, paused long enough to examine. His fate is one of the game's more complete examples of what happens when a person organizes their entire existence around a single goal and achieves it. He reaches what he was seeking. He understands what it was. And then, having understood, he is no longer needed by the one who provided the understanding. The moment of his dissolution comes immediately after the moment of his triumph, which is a kind of dark poetry that Hermaeus Mora probably finds satisfying. Parthurnax lives at the throat of the world's summit, meditating in the cold above all the clouds, and he has been there since the early days of the Dragon War. He is the master of the greybeards, which is already remarkable, but the more remarkable fact about Parthurnax is the history that precedes his meditation. He served Alduin. He helped Alduin establish dominion over men in the early days, when dragons ruled Skyrim and humans were subject to them. He taught Alduin's tactics. He was, in a specific and historical sense, a participant in one of the darkest periods in human history. He chose differently. At some point that the game does not precisely date, he changed. He chose to take the side of men. He taught the ancient Nords the Thuum, the voice, the weapon they eventually used to cast Alduin forward through time and break the dragon's grip on the world. He has been meditating on the summit of the throat of the world ever since, in an extended act of self-discipline that he describes as the daily practice of resisting the nature he was born with. His conversation with the Dragonborn about his past is one of the game's most carefully written, because it is a conversation about guilt and change, and the question of whether past actions can be adequately addressed by subsequent ones. Parthurnax does not claim that his change erases what he did. He claims that the change was real, and that maintaining it requires ongoing effort. The greybeards' decision to remain on the mountain and to have no more involvement in the world's affairs than is absolutely necessary is from this angle not withdrawal but discipline, the practice of a way of being that contradicts what he once was. Arngeir is the most vocal of the greybeards, which is a distinction that carries considerable irony given that the greybeard's vocation is a kind of extreme discretion about the use of the voice. He speaks when the others do not, and his speaking has the quality of someone choosing each word with the care of someone who understands that words, for him, have a weight that they do not have for most people. A shout from Arngeir would damage a room. He is careful. His skepticism about the Dragonborn's readiness and about the Dragonborn's involvement in the larger events of the era is not obstructionism, but caution. He has watched the world for a very long time from his place on the throat of the world, and he has seen what happens when power arrives without the wisdom to use it carefully. His concern is not about the Dragonborn specifically, but about the pattern, the way that great capability concentrated in a single person tends to be shaped by the institutions and allegiances that person is already embedded in, and the way that those shapings do not always produce the outcome the capability seemed to promise. Bori and Wulfgar, the other greybeards, speak so rarely that their individual characters are almost entirely projected by the player rather than given. They are presences more than personalities, monks who have so thoroughly integrated silence into their practice that their individual inner lives are not available to casual observation. They are part of what the throat of the world means, the weight of committed practice over a very long time, and the particular quality of peace that such commitment produces. The companion's members, who are not part of the circle, have their own lives and histories that the game fills in at the edges. Torvar is a companion who has not made it to the circle and who processes this with the particular bitterness of someone who was not born to give up but has run out of alternative interpretations of his situation. He drinks too much, and he knows it, and the knowing has not changed the drinking, which is a familiar human configuration. He is not a bad warrior. He is a person whose relationship with his own potential has gotten complicated in ways that the road from potential to realization often allows. Jada Stonearm has a competitive energy that she directs primarily at the Dragonborn on their arrival, because the arrival of someone who might be more capable than she is represents a specific category of challenge. She is not hostile, she is assessing. The challenge she offers is the challenge of someone who wants to know where they stand relative to every new person who walks through Jorvaskar's doors, not because she is insecure, but because understanding relative capability is part of how she maintains her own orientation in the organization. Athos, the Dunmer companion, occupies a position in Jorvaskar that is not entirely unlike Irileth's in Dragon's Reach. A dark elf who has found a place in a Nordic institution through merit and persistence, rather than through the cultural inheritance that most of the institution's members share. He is focused and competent and not particularly given to the kind of sociability that would make him immediately legible to new arrivals. He is simply doing the work with the quiet confidence of someone who has decided that the work is the most reliable argument for his belonging. The Dawnguard, Skyrim's ancient order of vampire hunters, has been disbanded for decades by the time the Dragonborn encounters their signal and makes their way to Fort Dawnguard in the Rift's southern reaches. Isran, who has been working to rebuild the organization, is a man of intense conviction and limited patience for those who do not share it. He left the organization before its formal disbanding because he believed the threat of vampires was being underestimated, and he has spent the intervening years being right about this in a way that has not made him easier to be around. His manner is the manner of someone who has been preparing for a specific crisis and has found the crisis arriving exactly as predicted, which produces not satisfaction but urgency. He is not interested in the validation of having been correct. He is interested in responding to the thing that is now actually happening, and he wants people around him who can match his pace and his seriousness. He does not suffer what he perceives as casual treatment of existential threats. Serene Gerard and Gunmar are the two specialists whose recruitment marks the beginning of the rebuilt organization's operational capacity. Serene is a former Dwemer enthusiast turned dawnguard researcher whose analytical ability Osran values, even while her detached intellectual approach to vampire biology occasionally tests his patience. Gunmar trains the armored trolls that become the Dawnguard's heavy assets, and his relationship with these animals has the quality of genuine affection beneath the practical arrangement. He understands them. He has worked with animals long enough to have developed a vocabulary for their inner lives that most people would not credit. Serana is the vampire daughter of Lord Harkon, the lord of the Volkihar vampire court, and her reintroduction to a world she has been sealed away from for thousands of years is the emotional center of the Dawnguard expansion's narrative. She was placed in her tomb by her own choice to protect the Elder Scroll she carries and to escape a situation inside her family that had become untenable. The details of why she chose entombment over any other option are revealed gradually, and they reframe her composed demeanor as the hard-won stability of someone who has been through genuinely difficult things and emerged with herself intact. Her relationship with her father is one of love and profound disappointment, and the disappointment is not simple. Harkon is not simply a villain to her. He is her father, a man she remembers from before he became what he is, and the person he has become in the intervening centuries has done things that cannot be accepted even by someone who loves the person who did them. She navigates this with the precision of someone who has had a very long time to separate her understanding of a person from her judgment of their actions. Her mother Valerica, who imprisoned herself in the soul cairn to protect the Elder Scroll from Harkon's plans, made a choice that saved the scroll and stranded herself in a realm between worlds for centuries. Her relationship with Serana carries the particular strain of a mother who made an enormous sacrifice for her daughter and is not entirely certain her daughter understood it as the sacrifice it was, and a daughter who understood the sacrifice and is not entirely certain it was the right one to make. The Dwemer ruins scattered across Skyrim are the most visible evidence of a civilization that the world has not recovered from losing. They were master artificers. Their automatons, their architecture, their understanding of steam and soul gems, and the fundamental forces of the world exceeded anything that came before or after them in Tamriel's documented history. Their disappearance at the Battle of Red Mountain, in the moment that their greatest weapon was activated, removed an entire people from the world simultaneously leaving behind the mechanisms and the structures, but taking the knowledge of what they were doing and why. Kagramez on the island of Solstheim is a Dwemer testing arena that gives a partial answer to one of the secondary questions about Dwemer civilization, what they used to evaluate and develop their constructs. The arena runs through progressively more demanding trials against increasingly sophisticated Dwemer machines, and the progression suggests an organization that approached the improvement of artificial intelligence through systematic empirical testing rather than theoretical modeling. They built, they tested, they improved what did not perform as expected. The methodology is legible even when the specific goals of it are not. The Ethereum Forge, buried beneath one of the more dramatic Dwemer ruin complexes, represents the ceiling of Dwemer metallurgical achievement. Ethereum is a material that does not occur naturally in useful concentrations anywhere else in the province, and the Dwemer's ability to refine and work it produced objects of extraordinary magical density. The fact that the forge still works, that the machinery still operates after thousands of years of abandonment, says something about the quality of Dwemer engineering that no description quite matches. It is simply more durable than anything built since. Neloth of House Telvanni is on Solstheim, because Solstheim provides him with access to research opportunities that mainland Morrowind, for all its academic resources, does not. He is one of the oldest and most powerful members of the Telvanni, is of the Morrowind Wizard House, whose members live so long and grow so powerful that they become something functionally closer to force of nature than to person, and he has arrived at an age where the comfortable and the conventional have both become boring in the specific way that things become boring when you have exhausted every variation of them. His treatment of others is the treatment of someone for whom most people have long since ceased to be interesting as individuals and have become primarily useful as sources of specific competencies he does not currently have. He is not cruel. Cruelty requires caring enough to intend harm, but he is indifferent to comfort and consequence in a way that makes him effectively dangerous to people who mistake his indifference for benevolence. He is interested in knowledge. He is interested in magical research. He is interested in a limited and academic way in the Dragonborn, who represents a category of being that his studies have equipped him to appreciate, even if his social skills have not equipped him to express that appreciation warmly. His steward, Verona Nellis, manages his tower and his schedule and his household needs with the competence of someone who has learned that the most effective way to work for Neloth is to make decisions within her scope without bothering him, and to bring only the things genuinely beyond her authority. She has calibrated this balance through trial and error over years of service, and the calibration has made her the most essential person in his immediate world. The Skaal village of Solstheim is a community of Nords whose relationship to the island predates the Dwemer refugees who arrived after Red Mountain's eruption, and their traditions carry a quality that is recognizably Nordic, but inflected by the specific environment of Solstheim, the ash and the snow and the presence of the stones that they have tended for generations. Fenari Strongvoice leads the village with the particular authority of a community elder in a small and close-knit place, where leadership means knowing everyone and being known by everyone and making decisions that the entire community will feel. Freya, the Skaal shaman's daughter, is the first Skaal the Dragonborn meets on Solstheim in the drowned context, and she is in the process of watching her entire community fall under the influence of Miraak, the first Dragonborn, who has extended his control over the island's people through the standing stones they maintain. Her ability to resist this control, which she attributes to her training in Skaal spiritual practice, gives her the particular dignity of someone whose preparation for a crisis turns out to have been exactly the right preparation. Storn Cragstrider, her father, carries the weight of a knowledge he has been keeping that he understands will cost him. He knows what it will take to break Miraak's hold. He knows the price. He has been a shaman long enough to understand that the knowledge he holds is sometimes more of a burden than a gift, and that the moment when a shaman's knowledge becomes most necessary is often the moment when holding it has become most expensive. The city of Solitude's market district contains a figure who appears unremarkable and is, in the specific context of what she actually is, one of the most unusual people in Skyrim. Gisser is not the person worth discussing here. What is worth discussing is the city's harbor and the East Empire Company warehouse that sits at the bottom of the Solitude steps, and the enormous commercial infrastructure that Skyrim's most imperial city represents in the province's trade network. The East Empire Company is the imperial trading organization that manages the flow of goods between Skyrim and the wider empire, and its Solitude office is the most significant operational center in the north. Vittoria Vici manages the company's Solitude operations, while also being engaged to Asgeir Snowshod of Riften, a marriage of considerable political significance that has been arranged to help bridge the Civil War's commercial disruptions. She approaches both the marriage and the job with the business-like efficiency of someone who has decided that the most productive relationships with difficulty is to treat it as a project and manage it accordingly. She is not unfeeling, she is organized, and organization is how she handles the things she feels. Behrand is Solitude's city blacksmith, working at the forge outside the Blue Palace's grounds, with the steady competence of someone who services an entire city's need for weapons and armor, and has organized his days around that service. He is not glamorous, he is essential, and he knows the difference, and the knowing has given him a settled quality that the more dramatically positioned characters of Solitude's court do not always have. Hadvar and Ryloth are the two soldiers who bracket the Dragonborn's escape from Helgen, one Imperial, one Stormcloak, each representing the Civil War's opposing forces at their most human scale. They are not commanders, they are not ideologues, they are soldiers who are trying to survive a dragon attack and who are willing, in the crisis, to accept help from an unexpected direction regardless of political alignment. Hadvar is a young Imperial soldier from Riverwood, which means that escaping Helgen with him takes the Dragonborn directly to his family, to Alvor, to the village that becomes the first soft landing of their new life. He is not complicated in the way that some of the game's characters are complicated. He believes in the Empire with the uncritical sincerity of someone young enough to have not yet accumulated the specific disappointments that might revise that belief. He is also genuinely brave and genuinely decent, and those qualities are not contingent on his politics. Ryloth is a Stormcloak from Riverwood who grew up alongside Hadvar, which gives the opening sequence's divide between them the personal texture of a friendship that has been interrupted by a war that neither of them started. He believes in Ulfric with the same sincere intensity that Hadvar believes in the Empire, and the symmetry of their positions is the game's quiet argument that the Civil War is not at the level of the people actually fighting it, a simple story about which side is right. Both men are right about the things they can actually see from where they stand. Orgnar and Delphine's partnership in the Sleeping Giant, which we visited at the beginning, carries a symmetry with the Hadvar and Ryloth situation that the game does not announce, but that is there for players who are looking for it. Two people in the same space, one of whom knows something the other does not, managing the gap between their different levels of knowledge with the ordinary friction of a workplace relationship. Orgnar knows how to run the bar. Delphine knows who the Dragonborn actually is. Neither of them has the complete picture, and the inn operates in the space between their different incompleteness. That space, the distance between what a person knows and what is actually happening around them, is one of Skyrim's recurring structural elements. It is there in Elisif's court, where Sibyl Stentor has been hiding in plain sight for decades. It is there in Riften, where the Jarl's steward serves a different master than the Jarl herself. It is there in Windhelm's market, where Calixto's shop sells curiosities and conceals something considerably worse. It is there in Whiterun, where a woman who tells fortunes sits in the market district of a city full of people who cannot see her at all. The world of Skyrim is a world of layered knowledge, where what a person appears to be and what they actually are exist in ongoing negotiation, and where the Dragonborn's ability to move through every level of that world, through courts and taverns and dungeons and sacred summits and the hidden rooms of assassin sanctuaries, is the structural expression of the game's thematic argument that the truth is available, but only to those who are willing to look for it beneath the surface of things. The roads of Skyrim connect all of these people to each other in ways that the Hold's political boundaries do not quite capture. The merchant who travels between Riften and Windhelm, the pilgrim walking from Whiterun to the throat of the world, the courier who delivers letters from one corner of the province to another with the specific urgency of someone who is almost always carrying something someone is waiting for, these travelers are the circulatory system of a world that would otherwise be a collection of separate, enclosed spaces. Khajiit caravans move between the holds with goods from distant elsewhere, setting up outside the city gates, because the cities themselves have decided not to admit them, a prejudice that the caravans have learned to work around by establishing a commercial presence that the gates cannot quite block. Rasad leads the primary caravan, and his manner is the manner of someone who has been doing business in an environment that does not particularly welcome him for long enough to have become very good at it. He is professional, patient, and deeply familiar with the specific social navigation required to maintain commercial relationships with people who are suspicious of you. Madran leads another caravan, and his presence at Windhelm's gate, rather than within it, is one of Skyrim's small, persistent images of a world that is organized in ways that produce casual injustice without anyone particularly intending it. The Khajiit do not belong to Skyrim's hold system. They pass through it, they serve it commercially, they are not extended the basic courtesy of its shelter, and they continue because the commercial relationship is worth more than the resentment of the conditions it requires, or because the resentment has been converted over long years of practice into the particular professional equanimity of people who have decided to be excellent at what they do regardless of the welcome they receive while doing it. The inns of Skyrim are a specific social technology, places where the road's transience is given temporary shelter, where people who have nothing else in common share the specific commonality of being somewhere other than where they came from. Villamere Inn in Iverstead is one of those establishments that exists at the foot of the path to the throat of the world, and serves primarily as the last comfortable stop before the 7,000 steps become the traveler's entire reality. Wilhelm the innkeeper has been watching pilgrims come and go for long enough that he has developed a practical taxonomy of travelers, the ones who will make it up and the ones who will not, the ones who are genuinely seeking something and the ones who are running from something and have confused the two. Linley Star Sung, who performs at the Villamere, has a past that the game withholds and then reveals through the careful accumulation of small details, a name that does not quite fit, a manner that is more guarded than a bard's usually is, a relationship to the music that has the quality of something that once meant more and now is used to maintain the distance she has chosen. She is one of those characters who rewards the player for returning and asking the right questions in the right order, because the story she has does not present itself all at once, but arrives incrementally, the way real people's histories arrive in actual relationships. Bassianus Axius in Iverstead has a domestic situation. His relationship with Fastred, whose parents have opinions about their daughter's choices, is one of those small-town love story complications that the game renders with the simple directness of recognizing that the stakes of a personal choice feel absolute to the person making it regardless of their scale relative to the world's larger dramas. Temba Widearm, who runs the lumber mill in Iverstead, has a problem with bears. The bears of the nearby forest have been raiding her mill with a consistency that has graduated from nuisance to professional grievance, and her request for help with them has the quality of something that has been asked of many travelers who pass through without acting on it. She is not without humor about her situation, but she is tired of it, and the bears have become the symbol of everything frustrating about trying to run a productive enterprise in a world that regularly interrupts it with wildlife. The mill itself is one of Skyrim's basic economic units. Lumber goes in, planks come out, planks go to construction and heating, and the 1,000 other uses that wood serves in a province that is simultaneously full of trees and cold enough to require significant fuel. Temba's operation is not glamorous, but it is the kind of necessary that keeps a settlement viable, and her competence at running it is the kind of competence that holds do not celebrate because they depend on it too completely to notice it. The path from Iverstead's mill to the base of the 7,000 steps is a short walk that contains one of Skyrim's more effective atmospheric transitions, from the ordinary human activity of a mill town to the beginning of something that is genuinely different in kind, where the stones underfoot are ancient and the wind has picked up and the ordinary social world is behind you, and what is ahead requires something more than ordinary social preparation. The pilgrims who make this walk have made a decision. The nature of that decision is legible in the way they walk. Klimek is an Iverstead resident who makes regular supply runs to High Hrothgar, carrying food and necessities to the greybeards who do not descend for such things. He has been doing this for long enough that the climb has become routine for him in a way that is remarkable. 7,000 steps, regularly, with supplies, across a mountainside that kills people who are less familiar with it. He does this not because he has been asked to by any institution, but because he has decided that the greybeards need to eat and someone needs to bring them food, and he is the person who has made that his responsibility. The game does not make much of this. It is simply something Klimek does, one of those facts about a character that is more interesting the longer you sit with it. He is an ordinary man in an ordinary town who has organized one portion of his life around service to an extraordinary institution with no particular expectation of recognition from that institution and no particular resentment of the fact that he does not receive any. He carries the supplies. He makes the climb. He comes back down. This is the thing he has decided to do, and he does it. There is a kind of model of life in Klimek that the game's more dramatic characters do not offer, the model of someone who has found a sustainable relationship with something larger than themselves through consistent action rather than exceptional ability. He is not going to shout the voice. He is not going to fight a dragon. He is going to carry food up the mountain again and again for as long as he is capable of doing it, and the greybeards will be fed, and that is the thing he can offer the world, and he has decided it is enough. The Hold of the Pale and its capital of Dawnstar share the distinction of being among the coldest and most exposed settlements in the province. Dawnstar sits on the northern coast, with the Sea of Ghosts on one side and the frozen tundra on the other, and the wind that comes off the water in winter is the kind of cold that has formed a specific local culture, people who are built for endurance, who do not make much of hardship because making much of it would make it worse. Skald the Elder, the Jarl of the Pale, is a supporter of the Stormcloak cause, with the fervent conviction of a man who has decided that the clarity of allegiance is more valuable than the nuance of independent thought. He has dispatched his hold's fighters toward the Civil War's front lines with an enthusiasm that his hold can barely sustain, and his steward Ulfric has been quietly managing the consequences of this enthusiasm. Not enough guards, not enough resources, too many needs, and not enough allocation to address them, with the patient efficiency of someone who has learned to keep an institution functioning despite the person ostensibly running it. Ruslif and his wife Seren run Dawnstar's smithy, and their marriage is one of the game's quieter, multicultural details. He is a Nord. She is a Redguard from Hammerfell. They met somewhere, chose each other, and built a life in Dawnstar's cold and wind because that is where the work was, and the work has been good to them. Their specific story is not told in any detail, but the fact of them, the everyday reality of a mixed couple running a business in a Nordic hold, is itself a small argument about what Skyrim's world actually contains beneath its sometimes narrow surface presentations. Medina is Dawnstar's court mage, and she is one of the game's more sympathetic renderings of someone who has survived something they were not prepared to survive. She served in the Great War as an imperial battle mage, using destruction magic in conditions she was not emotionally equipped to manage regardless of her technical proficiency. She did what she was asked to do. She did it effectively. She has been trying to get far away from that effectiveness ever since, which is why she is in Dawnstar, as far from the Empire's military apparatus as she can place herself while still being employed. Her magic training made her capable of things she finds she cannot make peace with having done. She is not without regret. She is not without conscience. The regret and the conscience are the reason she is in Dawnstar poring over books that have nothing to do with battle instead of in the capital training successors. She is trying to be someone different from the person the war required her to be, and the trying is still active, which means it has not yet resolved into either success or failure. Forkmar Banner Torn, the Pale's Stormcloak commander, has the kind of direct battle energy that Skald's enthusiastic commitment to the cause has deployed toward the actual conflict. He is not a complicated man, but he is a genuine one. He believes in what he is fighting for, and he is good at the fighting. And in the context of a civil war, these two things together produce a person of considerable effectiveness and limited interest in reflection. Morthal, in the hold of Yalmarch, is a village of fog and marshland, and a quality of isolation that most of Skyrim's other settlements do not have. The hold itself is not strategically important enough to be a major theater of the Civil War, and Morthal's politics are accordingly lower stakes than Whiterun's or Windhelm's. What Morthal has instead of political significance is atmosphere, the kind of thick, cold, damp atmosphere of a place that is not quite comfortable with visitors and does not particularly encourage them to stay. Jarl Idgrod Ravencrone holds the hold with an authority that is partly conventional and partly mystical. She has visions. This is not a metaphor or a diplomatic way of describing good political instinct. She sees things that have not happened yet with a consistency that her years have given her a particular kind of equanimity about. Her visions are not reliably interpretable. She cannot always tell what they mean in advance of the events they describe, but they have accumulated over her life into a general sense that the world is larger and more strange than most administrators choose to engage with, and this sense has made her a more patient and in some ways more wise ruler than a more conventionally practical person would be. Her husband Asilfur manages the hold's practical administrative functions with the slightly put-upon patience of someone who has long since accepted that the person he married is going to be interesting in ways that create administrative complications, and who has organized his life around managing those complications with enough grace that they remain complications rather than crises. Alva and Hrogar are at the center of Morthal's central quest line, and the situation between them is one of the game's more quietly disturbing domestic arrangements. Hrogar's house burned down with his wife and daughter inside, and he has since moved in with Alva with an alacrity that the village finds suspicious, and the suspicion is well founded. Alva is a vampire. She has compelled Hrogar's behavior through an influence that he is not fully experiencing as external, which is the specific horror of vampire compulsion, not the removal of consciousness, but the contamination of will, so that the person continues to experience themselves as choosing while the choice is not fully their own. The investigation into the fire and its circumstances is one of those Skyrim quests that rewards genuine attention to dialogue and environmental detail, because the evidence is not gathered through a single dramatic revelation, but through the accumulation of smaller observations that require the Dragonborn to actually talk to the people involved and read the space carefully. The town's Jarl and the townspeople's suspicion and the specific behavior of Hrogar all contribute to a picture that is disturbing precisely because it is assembled from ordinary-seeming pieces. Lami at the apothecary in Morthal is one of those quiet, competent figures who keeps a settlement's daily needs addressed while the dramatic events unfold around her. She makes potions. She knows her craft. She is looking for a specific book that she once owned and lost, and her request for it is the request of someone for whom a text has personal significance beyond its commercial value. It was where she learned the things she now practices professionally, and she would like to have it back. Falion in Morthal is a mage who moved to the village after leaving the College of Winterhold, and his reasons for leaving are not fully elaborated by the game, but can be inferred from what he does in Morthal. He conducts research into vampirism and Daedric summoning that the college officially discourages. He has found in Morthal's relative isolation the freedom to pursue lines of inquiry that more supervised academic environments would not permit, and he uses that freedom with the focus of someone who is working towards something specific rather than simply exploring without direction. He is the only person in Skyrim who can cure vampirism, which makes him one of the game's more practically important characters, regardless of the relatively low profile he maintains. He is not warm. He is not unfriendly. He is someone who has made a specific accommodation with the world. He will do the work he considers important. He will provide the service the work enables, and the social pleasantries that most settlements require of their residents will be managed at the minimum effective level. His standing in Morthal is complicated by the townspeople's suspicion of his research methods. They have seen him at the Marsh at night, conducting rituals that the context makes legible only as concerning to someone who does not understand what he is actually doing. He has decided that explaining himself thoroughly would take more time than the explanation is worth, and that operating under a certain level of communal suspicion is preferable to the alternative of justifying himself to people whose understanding of magic will not, regardless of the explanation's quality, reach a level where the justification becomes fully satisfying. The Rift's wilderness between Riften and Ivarstead contains a settlement called Shore's Stone, a mining community whose name invokes one of Tamriel's oldest divine figures. Shore, the dead god of the Nords, whose relevance to a silver mine might seem obscure, but whose association with the earth and with the specific Nordic relationship with what lies beneath the world gives the name a resonance that is not accidental. The miners who work in Redbelly Mine have a practical and unromantic relationship with the underground that contrasts interestingly with the place's mythological name. Sylgia is a miner in Shore's Stone whose parents live in Darkwater Crossing, and the errand she asks of passing travelers, delivering a satchel to her parents, is one of those small quests that gives the world its sense of connection. People in Skyrim exist in relationship to each other across the distances the holds impose, and the desire to send something to someone you cannot reach yourself is a fundamentally human motivation that the game uses to build the texture of a world where the roads between settlements are not just fast travel options, but actual distances that have weight. Oddfell and Grogmar grow Burzag, work the mind together, and maintain the friendly hostility of a long professional partnership between people who disagree about almost everything and have reached the stage of that disagreement where it is more comfortable than agreement would be. Their bickering about the quality of their respective contributions to the mind's daily output has the quality of a conversation that has been happening, with small variations, for years. Darkwater Crossing is a small mining settlement near the Darkwater River, and its most significant role in the game's opening section is as the location of the Imperial ambush that begins everything. The census and excise wagon that carries the Dragonborn, Hadvar, Ulfric, and Raulof toward Helgen was intercepted near here, and the chaos of that interception deposited the game's protagonist into the execution scene with enough disorientation to make the confusion feel genuine rather than contrived. Verna Rock Chucker and Annika Cragjumper are the settlement's primary residents, a married couple whose relationship has developed a comfortable quality that long marriages sometimes achieve. They know each other completely, they have organized their shared life around that knowledge, and the knowing has become the house they inhabit, rather than the romantic mystery that first brought them together. Annika is a former adventurer who has settled into domestic life with a residual energy that occasionally requires an outlet, and she is the settlement's primary contact for any travelers who need orientation to the area. The Golden Rock mine that they work is a gold mine, which gives Darkwater Crossing a commercial significance that its small size does not visually suggest. Gold in Skyrim is not merely currency, it is a traded commodity minted into septums that circulate through the province's commerce and imported into the broader imperial economy. The small community of workers who extract it from the ground are part of a supply chain that extends from this riverbank in the Rift all the way to the trading centers of Cyrodiil and beyond. Helgi's Ghost in Morthal is one of the game's most affecting uses of Skyrim's supernatural logic. A child who died in a house fire appears after dark, wanting to play the kind of games that the living and the dead can only play if one of them is willing to take the game seriously enough to follow it to its conclusion. She leads the Dragonborn to her own grave, and the conversation that follows has the simple sadness of a child who knows something happened to her but has not yet assembled it into the complete understanding that would change the quality of her presence. The ghost children of Skyrim are rare, and Helgi is the most individuated of them, not a scene element, but a character with a specific and heartbreaking situation. She was scared. The fire was fast. She does not fully understand why she is outside now, and her mother and her house are gone. Her fear is still present in the way that children's fears are present, close to the surface, not yet processed into the adult forms of grief and understanding. She is a child, and she died being afraid, and the game honors that by not explaining it away. The investigation of her death is what gives Morthal's otherwise quiet hold its most memorable moment, and the resolution of it, finding the vampire, confronting the compulsion, and understanding the chain of decisions that led from one person's choices to a child's death, is the kind of sequence that stays in the memory not because of its spectacle, but because of its emotional clarity. Something true was done here. Something wrong was done here. The difference between the two is visible if you look at it. Karjo is a Khajiit guard who travels with the caravans and has a cat and mouse, in his case a literal item, stolen that the Dragonborn can recover. His situation on the road is the situation of the caravans generally. traveling people in a settled world, maintaining a route and a commercial presence in conditions that require them to be always somewhat outside the structures that settled people take for granted. He is professional about this. He has made his peace with the particular form of his life and the particular form of its freedoms and limitations. Maik the Liar appears periodically across Skyrim in locations that are impossible to predict, saying things that are impossible to reconcile with any consistent version of reality. He is Skyrim's most deliberately mysterious figure, a Khajiit who seems to know things he should not know, who makes observations that apply to the world the Dragonborn is standing in, but also seem to refer to something beyond it, and who disappears after each conversation without explanation. He is a joke, and he is a question, and he is a tradition that the series has maintained across several games, always in the same form, always elusive, always vaguely aware of the nature of his own existence. His appearances are one of Skyrim's small gifts to players who are paying attention broadly rather than narrowly. You cannot predict when he will arrive. You cannot seek him out reliably. You can only encounter him by being present to the world in a general enough way that he becomes visible. In this, he resembles the small discoveries that make the province feel inhabited rather than constructed. Quintus Naval works at White File, the alchemy shop in Windhelm, alongside Nurelian, whose life's work has been the search for the White File itself, the legendary vessel said to be capable of holding any liquid in its perfect state. When the Dragonborn recovers the file for Nurelian, the moment of delivery is handled with a gentleness that is almost difficult to watch. The old alchemist holds in his hands the thing he has spent his life seeking, and the holding reveals that the artifact is damaged in a way that prevents it from serving the function he imagined for it. Quintus watches. There is nothing useful he can do. He knows his employer, and he knows what this costs him. After Nurelian's death, Quintus inherits the shop and a restored file, and the restoration becomes possible through the Dragonborn's efforts in a way that arrives after the moment of need rather than before it. Quintus's response to this delayed restoration, the file working as Nurelian always believed it could after Nurelian is gone, is one of those moments where Skyrim allows for an emotion that is not quite grief and not quite gratitude, but something that contains both, the feeling of a right thing happening too late. Angrinor, once honored, is a Windhelm veteran who has ended up on the street. His service to the Empire leaving him without the material support he believed that service would provide. He is bitter. He has earned his bitterness through the specific disappointment of someone who fulfilled their end of an agreement and found the other party did not. His presence on Windhelm's streets is the game's acknowledgement that wars have aftermath, and that the aftermath is not always honored. Amryn in Whiterun is searching for a family sword that was taken from him, and his quest is one of those personal errands that the game distributes through the world's minor characters without attaching them to a major storyline. He was a soldier. The sword was his father's, and his father's before that, and losing it was the loss of more than a weapon. It was the loss of the continuity of something that connected him backward through generations to people he could not otherwise touch. He has a wife named Saphir and a daughter named Braith, who has a reputation in Whiterun's market area for bullying other children with a directness that her father's military background has perhaps inadvertently encouraged. Braith herself is one of those small characters who rewards a second conversation. She has a child's understanding of social power, direct, unmediated, expressing itself as dominance because she has not yet developed the adult tools for managing the social desire to matter in ways that do not require someone else to be smaller. She is not a bad child. She is a child whose model of strength came from a context that did not include much nuance about its application. Heimskr, the Talos preacher, in Whiterun's Wind District, delivers his sermons to whoever is within earshot with the conviction of someone for whom the message is so important that the question of reception has become secondary. He is loud. He is persistent. He is entirely committed to the preaching, regardless of its reception, and the citizens of Whiterun have made various accommodations to the fact of his presence, from those who find him comforting to those who find him an obstacle to peaceful transit through the district. The Temple of Kinnereth in Whiterun is tended by Danica Purespring, a healer whose vocation is one of Skyrim's less celebrated but more necessary arts. She heals. She trains healers. She maintains the Gildergreen, the sacred tree in the Wind District, whose decline she is troubled by, because it is connected to a tree that grows in one of the world's most sacred places. Her request for the sap that could restore it is a small quest with a large emotional center, the care of a living thing, and the specific devotion of a person who has built her sense of purpose around the practice of that care. Heimskr and Danica share the Wind District's elevated ground with the Companions' Mead Hall below, and the three institutions together, the Warrior Guild, the Healer's Temple, the Preacher's Corner, form a kind of compressed summary of what a Nordic city values when it is not being purely political: combat, healing, devotion. The three competencies that a community needs to survive winter and war, and the spiritual question of what all of it is for. Adrienne Avenici, Proventus's daughter, runs the War Maiden's smithing shop just inside Whiterun's main gate, and the location of her shop is the game's practical recognition that a city's first need from a blacksmith is accessibility. She works the outdoor forge even in cold weather with the pragmatism of someone for whom craft is a physical activity that does not benefit from architectural protection. Her husband, Ulfberth Warbear, handles the shop's sales while she handles its production, and the division of labor has the efficiency of a partnership that has been refined over time into a system that works. The Temple of Mara in Riften is tended by Maramal, whose role includes performing wedding ceremonies, a fact that is available to any dragonborn who has gathered a single amulet of Mara from the world and learned to wear it as a social signal. Maramal's approach to his ministry combines genuine warmth for the couples he unites with a recruiting energy that occasionally shades into the slightly anxious evangelism of someone who is very certain that everyone would benefit from his organization's particular offering. The marriages available to the Dragonborn through the Temple of Mara are one of Skyrim's more discussed features: the ability to marry a wide range of characters who have expressed interest, from innkeepers to warriors to merchants to companions, and to settle into a domestic life that provides practical benefits alongside its personal dimension. The range of potential partners reflects the world's social variety in a way that was, at the time of the game's release, notable for its inclusiveness. Dinya Balu also serves at the temple, and her quest, a series of errands performed in the name of love, delivering messages between characters whose situations require an outside party to move the story forward, is one of those quests that is quietly about the social infrastructure of intimacy. Love does not always find its way to expression by itself. It requires the right message at the right time, delivered by someone who can be trusted not to change it in transit. Dinya has decided that this delivery service is sacred work, and the game's handling of the quest suggests that the decision is not wrong. The Ratway beneath Riften is the underground network that houses the Thieves Guild's headquarters, and it is also home to people who have been extruded from the city above by processes that the game does not fully explain, but that the presence of clearly human beings living in a sewer suggests. Draf and Hunan Blackskeever are a pair of would-be Thieves Guild members whose application to join the organization was rejected, and who have been living in the Ratway's tunnels ever since, targeting travelers who pass through with the inefficient aggression of people whose plan was never very good, but who have run out of alternatives. Salvianus is another Ratway resident, a former Legion soldier whose trajectory from military service to underground survival has left him in a state of ongoing confusion about what he was and what he is. He is not dangerous. He is lost in the specific way of someone whose identity was entirely organized around an institution and who is now outside that institution without having developed any of the alternative frameworks that would allow him to function independently. The Ragged Flagon Cistern, beyond the Ratway's more chaotic outer reaches, is the guild's actual home, a large underground chamber where the organization lives and works and maintains the particular communal atmosphere of people who have chosen an unconventional life together. The cistern has a quality of domesticity that the game's other faction headquarters do not quite match. People live here, they eat here, they complain about the guild's current troubles in the way of people who are emotionally invested in the institution's success rather than just professionally attached to it. The road to Solitude from Whiterun passes through Dragonbridge, a settlement built around the ancient bridge whose decorative dragon heads have been there longer than anyone can remember with certainty. The bridge is notable enough that the settlement takes its name from it, which is itself interesting, a community so thoroughly defined by a piece of infrastructure that the infrastructure has become the community's identity. Fida runs the Four Shields Tavern in Dragonbridge with the efficiency of someone who knows that her location on the main road between the province's most important political centers gives her establishment a steady traffic that does not require much in the way of marketing. People stop because the road requires them to stop, and once stopped, they need food and rest and a place to sleep. She provides these things competently, and that competence is the whole of the business plan. Horgir is the town's woodcutter, and his situation has the particular domestic comedy of a man who has been persuaded by his wife's cleverness into an arrangement that he is not fully certain he agreed to. His wife Lodor's management of him is one of those relationship details that the game handles with affection rather than judgment. She has found the lever that adjusts his behavior and she uses it, and he is not quite aware of the mechanism. And the arrangement works well enough for both of them that neither has much incentive to examine it more carefully. Soloff in Falkreath runs Grey Pine Goods with his brother Boland, who works the local mill, and their relationship has the fraternal quality of siblings who have built their adult lives in geographic proximity without necessarily having built much emotional proximity into the arrangement. Boland is hostile to non-Nords in a way that Soloff is not, and the difference in their characters creates a business dynamic that is slightly awkward for a merchant who presumably wants to serve customers of all backgrounds. Soloff manages this by being professionally warm while his brother is personally cold, and the resulting enterprise functions despite the tension. Matthias and Indara Kyrelia in Falkreath run the local farm, and their situation when the Dragonborn arrives is organized around a fresh loss. Their daughter Lavinia was killed, and the crime's resolution is the business of the local guard. The specificity of parental grief in a small community where the person who died was known to everyone, and the loss is therefore also everyone's loss, even as it is most specifically and irreversibly theirs, gives Falkreath's opening moments a quality that the game does not announce, but that is present in the quality of the interactions it allows. Sinding in Falkreath's jail has a story that opens onto one of the more thoughtful moral questions in Skyrim's Daedric Quest series. He is a werewolf who killed a child, not from malice, but from losing control of something he was trying to manage. He carries this with the particular devastation of someone who knows precisely what they did and cannot argue themselves away from the knowledge. The Daedric quest his situation initiates is one of those Skyrim experiences that leaves the player with more questions than it resolves. Kust tends the Falkreath graveyard, and Falkreath has one of the largest graveyards in Skyrim, a function of its position as a hold where death has accumulated historical significance alongside the ordinary deaths that every community produces. The graveyard is not simply the resting place of Falkreath's citizens. It contains warriors, it contains people from distant places who ended their journeys here for reasons the markers do not specify, and it contains the small graves that represent the losses a community cannot integrate into its sense of continuity. Runil is the priest of Arkay in Falkreath, the god of the cycle of life and death, and his tending of the graveyard has a personal dimension that his professional role does not require, but that he brings to it regardless. He has his own losses. He has things in his past that the knight can make feel very immediate, and his service to the dead is in some measure also a service to that part of himself that has not fully made peace with the living. The hold of Falkreath has a quality of autumnal melancholy that no other hold in Skyrim quite replicates. The pine forests are dark and close. The mist sits in the valleys. The sense of something that was, and is no longer, is thicker here than in other places, and the graveyard at the town's edge is not separate from that atmosphere but its center and its expression. Nightingale Hall in the Rift's wilderness is the ancient outpost of the Nightingales, the elite thieves who serve as Nocturnal's agents in the mortal world, and the building has been abandoned long enough that its restoration to functional use is one of the Thieves Guild questline's satisfactions. The ceremony that inducts the Dragonborn into the Nightingales is one of Skyrim's more effectively atmospheric set pieces. The location, the darkness, the specific words, the promise being made to an entity whose nature makes the promise more serious than the ordinary employment agreement that most factions offer. Nocturnal herself, when she finally appears in the questline's conclusion, is one of the game's more carefully characterized Daedric princes. She is not interested in the Dragonborn's admiration or their service in the emotional sense. She is interested in what she is owed under the terms of the agreement, and she extracts it with the serenity of someone whose relationship with time is extensive enough that urgency is not a category she experiences. She will have what was promised. The question of when is immaterial. The Twilight Sepulchre, the final location of the questline, is one of those Skyrim spaces where the game's spatial design is doing most of the work. The deepening quiet, the increasing sense of being somewhere that is not quite part of the world in the ordinary sense, the specific figure of the pilgrim's path that the Dragonborn must walk alone, all of it accumulates into an experience that is less about the mechanics of completing the quest and more about the atmosphere of completing it. The word walls scattered across Skyrim's landscape are one of the game's most evocative details. Ancient carved stone tablets with the language of the dragon tongue inscribed on them, containing the words of power that the Dragonborn absorbs through proximity. They are not simply game mechanics, though they are that. So they are also a form of writing, the oldest writing in Skyrim's history, carved by people who understood the voice as the most fundamental form of expression available to beings who shared the world with dragons. The Nordic burial mounds that contain these walls are themselves texts, architectural narratives of the people buried inside them, constructed to communicate something about the person and the culture that built them to anyone who encountered them long after the civilization had passed. The Dragonborn who enters these mounds is reading, in a broad sense, the things that were built to be read, even if the reading involves fighting through whatever protections were placed to prevent casual access. Delphine's comment that the Dragonborn is shouting the words of ancient kings when they use the voice is one of the game's moments of elegant summary. The kings of ancient Skyrim were warrior poets, men who governed through power that was also language. who understood that the ability to name a thing was connected to the ability to affect it. The Dragonborn inherits this tradition not through scholarship but through blood. They can do what the ancient kings did because of what they are rather than what they have learned. The Companion's honor code, the warrior's way, the principle that strength is for the protection of the weak rather than the exploitation of it, is one of Skyrim's statements about the intended purpose of martial ability. It is articulated most clearly by Kodlak, and it functions as the moral spine of an organization that could otherwise become simply a professional violence guild. The code does not prevent violence. It organizes violence around a value system, which is the most that a martial culture can do with its violence without eliminating the martial component. The question of whether the companions live up to their code is the ongoing moral background of their questline. Skjor's decision to induct the Dragonborn into the circle before the organization's leadership has sanctioned it is a violation of the code's principle of institutional respect. Isla's embrace of Hircine's gift in ways that Kodlak finds troubling is a violation of the code's principle that the warrior's strength should not be dependent on something borrowed from a power with its own agenda. The questline's resolution, healing Kodlak's soul and then the souls of the previous harbingers, is the organization's attempt to bring itself back into alignment with what it claims to be. This pattern of an institution failing to live up to its stated values and then attempting to recover them is one that Skyrim uses across multiple faction questlines. The College of Winterhold is supposed to be a place of learning, and it contains people pursuing knowledge in ways that are dangerous to the institution and the world. The Thieves Guild is supposed to operate by a code, and it has been operating under a guild master who has violated every principle of that code. The companions say they protect the weak, and they contain people using a power that was given to them by a Daedric prince of the Hunt. The restoration of institutional integrity is the emotional satisfaction that these questlines offer. The Forsworn Briarheart warriors are one of Skyrim's more singular character types, men who have undergone a ritual that removes their heart and replaces it with a briar heart, a Hagraven offering that gives them power at the cost of their ordinary humanity. They fight with the intensity of the converted, which is to say without the ordinary person's relationship to self-preservation, because they are no longer quite ordinary persons. They are warriors in the way that dedicated things are warriors, completely without the reservation that a living heart provides. Which is the Hagravens who perform this ritual are themselves one of Skyrim's more disturbing figures, former Hagravens who are former women who chose to undergo a transformation that gave them power and took from them something that resists precise definition but that is visible in the absence of it. They are among the Forsworn's spiritual leadership, and their magic is old and specific and connected to a tradition of hedge witchcraft that predates the hold system by centuries. Melka, a Hagraven imprisoned in Blind Cliff Cave, is one of the game's more unusual characters, in the sense that she is a Hagraven who has been imprisoned by another Hagraven and who wants help getting free. Her interaction with the Dragonborn has the quality of a deal between two parties who are entirely clear about the transaction's nature. She wants out, she will pay for the help, the payment is specific, and the help is specific, and the emotional complexity of working alongside something that is objectively disturbing is the Dragonborn's problem to manage. Serana's transformation over the course of the Dawnguard questline is one of the more carefully written character arcs in Skyrim's DLC content. She begins the expansion as someone who has been sealed away from the world for a very long time, who is highly capable and deeply uncertain about where she belongs, in a present that is not the present she was taken from. She ends it having made choices that the questline does not force, but that feel earned by the experiences it has given her. Her offer to cure her own vampirism, To give up the immortality and the power and the specific nature that she has had for thousands of years is the most significant choice available to her, and the game handles it with the weight it deserves. It is not a simple choice. She is not trading something she dislikes for something she prefers. She is trading a known self for an unknown one, and the courage of the offer is in the full understanding of what it costs. Serana's relationship with the Dragonborn, if that relationship has been built carefully over the questline's duration, has a quality of genuine mutual recognition that the game achieves through small, consistent interactions rather than any single dramatic declaration. She has observed the Dragonborn. They have observed her. The understanding between them is built from the accumulation of shared experience rather than from a scripted emotional peak, and this makes it feel more real than the game's other romantic possibilities, which are more transactional in their structure. The College of Winterhold questline's conclusion involves a confrontation with a rogue Sigic monk named Ancano, who has been studying the Eye of Magnus, an artifact of considerable and poorly understood power, for purposes that the college did not invite and would not have approved. Ancano is a member of the Sigic Order, the ancient and secretive organization that predates most of Tamriel's current magical institutions, and that views itself as the original custodian of magical knowledge. His mission at the college has been to observe, but observation has given way to something more active. The Sigic Order's actual appearance in the quest line, the robed figures who appears in locked rooms and speak to the Dragonborn with the calm of people for whom urgency is a relative concept, is one of Skyrim's more effectively mysterious moments. They know what is happening. They know what needs to happen. They are providing the minimum intervention necessary to ensure that it does, and their restraint is not indifference, but a commitment to a methodology that has been developed over a very long time, and that the Order trusts more than any individual's instincts about the right time to act. Quaranir, the Sigic who speaks most directly with the Dragonborn, embodies this methodology. He gives enough to orient without giving so much that he solves the problem himself. The Dragonborn is the instrument of resolution, not the Sigic Order, and Quaranir's role is to ensure that the instrument understands what needs to be accomplished without removing the instrument's agency in accomplishing it. The very long road the game takes from the opening execution in Helgen to the final confrontation with Alduin at the summit of the world passes through all of these lives and places, and the journey's meaning is not in the destination, but in the accumulation. Every innkeeper, every guard, every blacksmith, every farmer, every jarl and steward and mage and thief and warrior, they are all there in the world, going about their days, containing their histories, carrying their secrets and their grief and their small domestic comedies, while the larger story moves around them and through them. The Dragonborn is the person who can see all of it, who can walk from a tavern in Riverwood to the court of Windhelm, to the ratway beneath Riften, to the summit of the throat of the world, who can have a conversation with a vampire court mage and a Khajiit caravan guard and a child ghost in the same day, who can fight dragons and then come home to a spouse who asks if they remembered to buy more firewood. The breadth of that access is the game's essential gift, the ability to inhabit a world at every level simultaneously, from the most epic to the most ordinary. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed drifting through these quiet moments, there's another video waiting on the left of your screen. Let it play while you rest. You might discover something gentle before sleep takes you again.